Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The curtains in Mr. Johnson's living room twitched again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was 3 a.m., and this was the third night in a row I'd caught a glimpse of his silhouette peering out into the darkness. Something wasn't right with my elderly neighbor, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover a truth that would change our quiet suburban street forever. I'd lived next door to Mr. Johnson for nearly 5 years, and in all that time, he'd been nothing but a kind, if somewhat reserved, neighbor. He'd always keep an eye on my house when I was away, and I'd return the favor by mowing his lawn or shoveling his driveway in the winter. But lately, something had shifted. It started with small things. I noticed he'd installed new locks on all his doors and windows. Then came the security cameras, their red lights blinking ominously from every corner of his property. At first, I chalked it up to the paranoia that sometimes comes with age. After all, Mr. Johnson was pushing 80, and living alone could make anyone a little jumpy. But then, the night watches began. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and catch a glimpse of him standing at his window, staring intently at something I couldn't see. During the day, he'd scurry from his car to his front door, looking around furtively, as if he expected someone to jump out at him at any moment. I tried to talk to him about it once, casually mentioning that I'd noticed he seemed a bit on edge lately. His reaction was unsettling. His eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw raw fear there. Then he composed himself, let out a forced chuckle, and said, "Oh, you know how it is. Can't be too careful these days." Before I could press further, he'd retreated into his house, the door slamming shut behind him. That conversation played on repeat in my mind as I stood at my own window, watching Mr. Johnson's silhouette. I knew I should just go back to bed, mind my own business, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. I had to know what was going on. The next day, I called in sick to work. As soon as Mr. Johnson left for his daily trip to the grocery store, always at precisely 10 a.m., I made my move. I felt like a criminal as I crept across our adjoining lawns, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I was just checking on a neighbor, making sure everything was okay, but deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. I tried the front door first, not really expecting it to be unlocked. To my surprise, it swung open easily. The house was silent as I stepped inside, the air thick with the musty smell of old books and something else I couldn't quite place. Everything looked normal at first glance. A tidy living room, family photos on the mantel, a half-empty cup of coffee on the side table. But as I moved further into the house, things started to feel off. There were small cameras hidden everywhere, behind picture frames, in the corners of rooms, even one disguised as a potted plant. In the kitchen, I found a stack of notebooks filled with what looked like coded messages and times of day. My hands were shaking as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a reasonable explanation for all of this. Maybe Mr. Johnson was just really into home security. Maybe he was writing a spy novel in his retirement. The upstairs hallway was lined with closed doors. I tried the first one, locked. The second, also locked. The third door, at the end of the hall, opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the entire house. I stepped inside and froze. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of dozens of computer monitors. Each screen showed a different view. Our street, the inside of houses, local businesses. With growing horror, I realized I was looking at live feeds from all over the neighborhood. And there, on one of the screens, was the inside of my own living room. My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was seeing. Mr. Johnson, the kindly old man who'd brought me homemade cookies when I first moved in, was spying on the entire neighborhood. But why? What could he possibly gain from this? I was so caught up in my shock that I almost didn't hear the front door open downstairs. Almost. The sound jolted me back to reality, and panic set in. Mr. Johnson was home early, and I was standing in the middle of his secret surveillance room. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the room was small and sparse. The closet was my only option. I ducked inside just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Through a crack in the door, I watched as Mr. Johnson entered the room. He moved with purpose, sitting down at the bank of monitors and typing rapidly on a keyboard. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest sound would give me away. Minutes ticked by like hours as I watched him work, muttering to himself occasionally. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stood up and left the room. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade away before I dared to move. My legs were cramped from crouching in the closet, and my heart was still racing. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't leave without understanding what was going on. I crept over to the monitors, my eyes scanning the screens. That's when I saw it. A document open on one of the computers. The heading read, Operation Neighborhood Watch, Surveillance Report. As I skimmed the document, pieces started to fall into place. Mr. Johnson wasn't just a paranoid old man. He was a former intelligence operative. The document detailed his mission to monitor the neighborhood for potential threats. But threats to what? The more I read, the more confused I became. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around to find Mr. Johnson standing behind me, his eyes cold and hard. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I've always liked you, you know, but curiosity can be a dangerous thing." I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but no words came out. Mr. Johnson sighed heavily. "I suppose I owe you an explanation," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. "But I warn you, once you know the truth, there's no going back." For a moment, I considered making a run for it. But where would I go? And who would believe me if I told them what I'd seen? Slowly, I sank into the chair, my eyes never leaving Mr. Johnson's face. He began to speak, and as the truth unfolded, I felt my world shift on its axis. Mr. Johnson wasn't just monitoring our neighborhood, he was protecting it. From what, you ask? From things most people couldn't even imagine. Our quiet suburban street, it turned out, sat on top of something valuable, something dangerous, something that certain powerful people would kill to get their hands on. Mr. Johnson had been tasked with keeping it safe, with making sure no one ever discovered the secret buried beneath our feet. "But why tell me all this?" I asked when he finally fell silent. "Why not just get rid of me?" Mr. Johnson's face softened slightly. "Because I'm getting old," he said. "This job, it's too much for one person. I've been watching you for years, waiting for the right moment. You're observant, you're clever, and most importantly, you care about this community. I think you're ready to take on the responsibility." My head was spinning. In the span of a few hours, my entire reality had been turned upside down. I wanted to refuse, to run away and pretend none of this had ever happened. But as I looked at the monitors, at the faces of my neighbors, people I'd come to care about over the years, I knew I couldn't walk away. "What do I need to do?" I heard myself ask. Mr. Johnson smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "First," he said, "we need to upgrade your home security system. You're going to need a lot more cameras." As I left Mr. Johnson's house that day, the sun seemed a little dimmer, the world a little darker, but I also felt a sense of purpose I'd never known before. I was no longer just a resident of this neighborhood. I was its protector. Now, as I sit in my own surveillance room, watching the monitors and keeping our secret safe, I often think back to that day. Sometimes, I catch a glimpse of my old self in one of the cameras, carefree, oblivious to the hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface of our quiet street. Part of me misses that innocence, But mostly, I'm grateful for the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. Because in this world, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously as I hunched over my laptop. The soft hum of lab equipment, my only company in the otherwise silent building. It was nearly midnight, and I was the last soul left in the university's research wing. Or so I thought. The sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway made my heart skip a beat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my late-night study session was about to take a sinister turn. I'm Emma, a grad student working on my thesis in biochemistry. My research focuses on developing a new type of biodegradable plastic, something that could potentially revolutionize the industry and help combat our growing environmental crisis. It's exciting work, but it's also highly confidential. The university has invested a lot of money in this project, and there are plenty of companies out there who'd love to get their hands on our findings. That's why I was still in the lab at this ungodly hour. I'd been making real progress lately, and I didn't want to lose momentum. Plus, the lab was quieter at night, free from the usual hustle and bustle of students and professors. The footsteps grew louder, and I found myself holding my breath. It wasn't unusual for other grad students to work late, but something about this felt different. The steps were too deliberate, too purposeful for someone just passing by. I quickly saved my work and closed my laptop, just as a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Jason, another grad student from the chemistry department. I'd seen him around campus a few times, but we'd never really talked. "Oh, hey, Emma," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't expect anyone else to be here this late." I forced a smile in return, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my stomach. "Yeah, just trying to get some work done. What brings you to this side of the building?" Jason shrugged, taking a step into the lab. "Just taking a walk, clearing my head. Mind if I hang out for a bit?" Before I could answer, he was already pulling up a chair next to me. I shifted uncomfortably, angling my body to block his view of my notes. "So, what are you working on?" he asked, leaning in closer than necessary. I gave him a vague answer about polymer research, hoping he'd lose interest. But Jason kept pressing, asking increasingly specific questions about my methods and results. "That's fascinating," he said, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me shiver. "You know, I've heard rumors about some groundbreaking research happening in this lab. Anything you can share?" I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Oh, you know how rumors are. Nothing that exciting happening here, I'm afraid." But Jason wasn't deterred. He continued to probe, his questions becoming more pointed and insistent. I found myself stumbling over my words, trying to deflect without seeming suspicious. As the conversation dragged on, I became increasingly aware of how isolated we were. The lab suddenly felt too small, too confined. I needed to get out of there. "Well, it's getting late," I said, starting to pack up my things. "I should probably head home." Jason's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I really think we should talk more about your research. It could be beneficial for both of us." I yanked my arm away, my heart pounding. "I told you, there's nothing to talk about. Now, if you'll excuse me." I tried to push past him, but Jason blocked the doorway. "I don't think you understand, Emma. I know what you're working on, and I know how valuable it is. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, I'm not leaving without that information." Panic surged through me as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just a nosy student. Jason was here to steal my research, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out, to find help, but the lab was on the top floor of the building, and at this hour, there was likely no one else around. "Jason, think about what you're doing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is crazy, just let me go and we can forget this ever happened. He laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, Emma, it's far too late for that. Now, why don't you be a good girl and hand over your laptop and notes? I clutched my bag tighter, shaking my head. Jason's eyes narrowed, and he took a step towards me. I reacted instinctively, grabbing a beaker from the nearby bench and hurling it at him. The glass shattered against his shoulder, and he cried out in pain and surprise. I used that moment of distraction to make a run for it, ducking under his arm and sprinting down the hallway. I could hear Jason cursing behind me, his footsteps pounding as he gave chase. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning as I pushed myself to the limit. I reached the stairwell and yanked the door open, only to find it pitch black inside. The emergency lights must have been malfunctioning. For a split second, I hesitated, weighing my options. Then I heard Jason's voice, too close for comfort, and I plunged into the darkness. I took the stairs 2 at a time, one hand on the railing to guide me, the other still clutching my bag. I could hear Jason stumbling down after me, his breathing heavy and labored. When I reached the ground floor, I burst through the door, ready to make a break for the exit. But my heart sank as I realized the main doors were locked. Of course they were. It was well past midnight, and the building was supposed to be empty. I spun around, desperately searching for another way out. That's when I saw it. A small security office tucked away in the corner. If I could get in there, I might be able to call for help. I ran to the office, praying it would be open. To my relief, the door swung open easily. I slammed it shut behind me, fumbling for the lock. Just as I heard the satisfying click of the lock engaging, Jason slammed into the door. The impact shook the entire room, and I stumbled backward, my heart in my throat. "Open the door, Emma," Jason shouted, pounding on the thick glass. "You can't hide in there forever." I ignored him, scanning the room frantically. There was a phone on the desk, but when I picked it up, the line was dead. Of course it was. Nothing could be easy tonight. My eyes fell on the security monitors lining one wall. Most of them showed empty hallways and darkened rooms, but one caught my attention. It was a live feed of the parking lot, and I could see a car pulling in. Hope surged through me. Someone else was here. If I could just hold out until they came inside, I might have a chance. Jason was still trying to break down the door, the wood splintering under his relentless assault. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I turned back to the monitors, willing the person in the parking lot to hurry up. But as I watched, I realized something was off. The car wasn't parking. It was just sitting there, engine running. A chill ran down my spine as a horrible thought occurred to me. What if this person wasn't here to help? What if they were with Jason? The door gave way with a sickening crack, and Jason burst into the room. I backed away, my eyes darting between him and the security monitors. "It's over, Emma," Jason said, advancing on me slowly. "Just give me what I want, and this can all be over." I shook my head, my back pressing against the wall. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to buy time. "Who are you working for?" Jason's lips curled into a sneer. "Does it matter? In this world, information is power, and your little biodegradable plastic, that's worth a fortune to the right people." He lunged forward, grabbing for my bag. I twisted away, but he caught hold of the strap. We struggled, pulling back and forth until the bag ripped open, spilling its contents across the floor. My laptop clattered to the ground, and Jason made a dive for it. In that moment of distraction, I saw my chance. I bolted for the door, my feet pounding against the linoleum as I ran back towards the stairwell. I could hear Jason shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my legs burning with the effort. I didn't have a plan beyond get away, but my instincts were screaming at me to head up, not down. I burst out onto the roof, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I ran to the edge, looking down at the empty campus below. No signs of life, no one to help. The door banged open behind me, and I whirled around to see Jason standing there, my laptop clutched in his hands. "End of the line, Emma," he said, breathing heavily. "No more running." I backed up until I felt the low wall at the edge of the roof pressing against my legs. Jason approached slowly, like a predator cornering its prey. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not too late to stop." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Sorry, Emma," he said, "but I've come too far to back out now." As he reached for me, a bright light suddenly flooded the rooftop. We both turned, squinting against the glare. A voice boomed out from a megaphone. "This is campus security. Stay where you are." Relief washed over me as I saw figures emerging from the stairwell. Real security guards, not whoever Jason had stationed in the parking lot. In the chaos that followed, as Jason was tackled and restrained, I sank to the ground, exhaustion and adrenaline catching up with me all at once. Later, as I sat wrapped in a shock blanket, giving my statement to the police, I couldn't help but think about how close I'd come to losing everything. My research, my future, maybe even my life. But I also felt a newfound strength. I'd faced my worst nightmare and come out the other side. And now, as I watched the sun begin to rise over the campus, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head on. The first time I saw the symbols, I thought they were just random scratches. Maybe the work of some bored teenager or the result of years of weathering. But as I traced my fingers over the rough-hewn marks in the old barn's wood, a chill ran down my spine. These weren't random at all. They formed patterns, intricate and purposeful. And somehow, deep in my gut, I knew they were a warning we should have heeded. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my family's dream of a fresh start turned into a waking nightmare. It all began 3 months ago when my husband, Tom, got a job offer in a small town upstate. We'd been struggling in the city for years, drowning in debt and stress. So when the opportunity came to move to a quieter, cheaper area, we jumped at it. The kids, Lily and Max, weren't thrilled about leaving their friends behind, but we promised them it would be an adventure. The farmhouse we found seemed perfect. It was old, sure, but it had character. Wooden beams, a wraparound porch, and acres of land stretching out in every direction. The real estate agent called it a handyman's dream, which was code for needs a lot of work. But Tom and I were up for the challenge. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, painting, and exploring our new property. The kids quickly forgot their initial reluctance, spending hours playing in the fields and climbing trees. Tom threw himself into renovation projects, and I started planning a vegetable garden. It felt like we were finally building the life we'd always wanted. But then, little things started happening. Things that were easy to brush off at first, but became harder to ignore as time went on. It started with the noises. At night, when the house was quiet and still, we'd hear creaks and groans that seemed to come from inside the walls. Tom said it was just the house settling, and I wanted to believe him. But the sounds didn't sound like wood expanding or contracting. They sounded deliberate, like footsteps or whispers just on the edge of hearing. Then there were the cold spots. Certain areas of the house would suddenly become frigid, even on the warmest days. We'd walk through them and feel like we'd stepped into a freezer. The kids started avoiding these areas, saying they felt weird in there. But it was the barn that really got to me. It stood a little ways from the house, old and weathered but still sturdy. We hadn't paid much attention to it at first, focusing on getting the house livable. But one day, while the kids were at school and Tom was at work, I decided to check it out. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the cracks in the walls. It smelled of old hay and something else, something musty and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. That's when I saw them. The symbols, carved into the wooden support beams, etched into the walls, even scratched into the dirt floor. They were everywhere, once I started looking. Circles and lines and shapes that looked vaguely like letters, but in no alphabet I'd ever seen. I spent hours in that barn, trying to make sense of the markings. By the time I heard Tom's car in the driveway, the sun was setting and my head was pounding. I hurried back to the house, not wanting to explain why I'd spent all day in a dusty old barn. That night, the noises were louder than ever. I lay awake, listening to what sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic. Tom slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the sounds that were driving me to the brink of madness. In the morning, I was determined to tell Tom about the barn and the symbols, but as I opened my mouth to speak, Lily came running into the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Dad," she sobbed, "there's something in my room." We rushed upstairs, Tom and I exchanging worried glances. Lily's room looked normal at first glance, but then I saw it. On the wall above her bed, scratched into the fresh paint we'd just applied last week, was one of the symbols from the barn. Tom was bewildered, asking Lily if she'd drawn it herself. But I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. The symbols started appearing all over the house, under rugs, behind picture frames, even carved into the vegetables in our garden. The noises got louder, and now we all heard them. Whispers in the walls, footsteps in empty rooms, and sometimes, late at night, what sounded like chanting coming from the direction of the barn. Max started sleepwalking, something he'd never done before. We'd find him in the morning, huddled in corners or standing in front of blank walls, muttering words we couldn't understand. Lily became withdrawn, spending hours drawing the symbols over and over in her sketchbook. Tom tried to rationalize it all away. He called in exterminators for the noises, electricians for the cold spots, even a child psychologist for the kids. But deep down, I think he knew as well as I did that this was something beyond normal explanation. It all came to a head one stormy night in October. The wind was howling outside, rain lashing against the windows. We were all in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a board game, when every light in the house went out at once. In the sudden darkness, I heard Lily whimper, and Max let out a startled cry. Tom fumbled for his phone, using it as a makeshift flashlight. "It's okay," he said, his voice strained with forced calm. "Probably just a blown fuse. I'll go check the basement." As soon as he left the room, the whispering started. It was all around us, coming from the walls, the floor, even seeming to emanate from the air itself. Words in a language I didn't recognize, but that filled me with a sense of dread. Lily screamed, pointing at the window. There, illuminated by a flash of lightning, was a figure, tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It was looking right at us, and though I couldn't make out its features, I knew it was smiling. In that moment, something in me snapped. I grabbed the kids and ran, not caring about the rain or the wind. We piled into the car, and I peeled out of the driveway, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Tom came running out of the house, shouting after us, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. All I knew was that we had to get away from that house, away from whatever evil had taken root there. We drove through the night, the kids huddled and crying in the back seat. I had no destination in mind, just away. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that I finally pulled over at a rest stop, my body trembling with exhaustion and leftover adrenaline. As I sat there trying to figure out what to do next, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom. "Where are you? Are you okay? Please come home. We need to talk about this." I stared at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back and face whatever was happening in our home. But a larger part, The part that had seen that figure in the window and heard those unearthly whispers, knew we could never go back. I texted Tom back. "We're safe. I'm sorry, but we can't come home. Not now. Maybe not ever. I'll explain everything soon. I love you." Then I turned off my phone, started the car, and pulled back onto the highway. I didn't know where we were going or what we'd do when we got there. All I knew was that we were leaving behind more than just a house. We were leaving behind a darkness that had almost consumed us, a mystery I'm still not sure I want to solve. As we drove, the sun climbing higher in the sky, I caught sight of my reflection in the rear-view mirror. There, just visible on my neck, was a small mark, a symbol like the ones from the barn. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever we'd awakened in that old farmhouse, it wasn't content to stay behind. It had marked us, claimed us in some way I didn't understand. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, the landscape blurring around us. We were running, yes, but I had a sinking feeling that you can't outrun something that's already inside you. Whatever happens next, wherever we end up, I know one thing for certain: our lives will never be the same. The fresh start we'd hoped for had turned into something dark and twisted, and now all we could do was face whatever came next, together. The old farmhouse stands empty now, I imagine, but sometimes, in my dreams, I see it. And in those dreams, I know it's not empty at all. It's waiting for the next family to come along, looking for their own fresh start. And I wonder, will they see the symbols? Will they hear the whispers? Or will they, like us, realize the truth too late? The snap of a twig under my boot echoed through the silent forest, and I froze mid-step. Something wasn't right. The woods, which had been alive with the sounds of birds and small animals just moments ago, had fallen eerily quiet. I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows between the trees. That's when I realized I wasn't just lost. I was in danger. My name is Alex, and I'm an experienced hiker. Or at least, I thought I was. I'd tackled challenging trails before, spent nights alone in the wilderness, and always prided myself on my ability to navigate even the most remote areas. But this time, I'd made a critical mistake. I'd underestimated the vastness of these woods and overestimated my own skills. It had started as a simple day hike. The trail was new to me, but it came highly recommended by fellow hiking enthusiasts online. Challenging but rewarding, they said. Breathtaking views, they promised. What they failed to mention was how easy it was to lose the trail if you weren't paying close attention. I set out early in the morning, my backpack filled with water, energy bars, and basic survival gear, just in case. The first few hours were exactly as I'd hoped. The trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal stunning vistas of the surrounding mountains. I felt alive, invigorated by the clean air and the physical exertion, but as the day wore on, things started to go wrong. The trail markers became less frequent, and I found myself second-guessing my direction more than once. I checked my phone's GPS, but out here, deep in the wilderness, I had no signal. My paper map and compass were useful, but only if I knew exactly where I was on the map, which I didn't. As the realization that I was lost began to sink in, I tried to remain calm. I knew the basics of wilderness survival. Stay put, they always say. Make yourself visible. Wait for rescue. But something in my gut told me that staying put wasn't an option. I needed to find my way back to civilization, and fast. I picked a direction that I thought would lead me back towards the trailhead and started walking. That's when I first noticed the silence. It crept up slowly, the natural sounds of the forest fading away until all I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. Then came the snapping twig and the undeniable feeling of being watched. I scanned the trees around me, searching for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. Still, The feeling persisted. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about stealth, just wanting to put distance between myself and whatever was out there. As I hurried through the underbrush, I caught glimpses of something moving in my peripheral vision. Shadows darting between trees, always just out of clear sight. My heart raced, and I found myself breaking into a run, branches whipping against my face as I crashed through the forest. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, gasping for breath, I stopped to lean against a large oak tree. That's when I saw it, a structure in the distance. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station or a cabin, somewhere I could find help, or at least shelter for the night. As I got closer, though, my hope turned to confusion, then to dread. It wasn't a single building, but a collection of them. Small, crude structures made of logs and salvaged materials. They formed a rough circle around a central clearing. It looked like some kind of settlement, but like nothing I'd ever seen before. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But I was exhausted, lost, and night was falling. I needed help, and this might be my only chance. The settlement appeared deserted at first glance. No smoke rose from the chimneys, no lights shone in the windows. But as I entered the clearing, I noticed signs of recent activity. A still warm fire pit, fresh footprints in the muddy ground. Someone, or something, had been here very recently. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid in the vast silence. "Is anyone here? I'm lost. I need help." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, people began to emerge from the structures. Men and women, dressed in ragged, homemade clothing. Their skin was weathered and dirty, their hair long and unkempt. But it was their eyes that truly frightened me. They were wild, almost feral, filled with a mixture of suspicion and hunger. They surrounded me, keeping their distance but cutting off any chance of escape. An older man with a long, gray beard stepped forward. He seemed to be their leader. "You shouldn't be here, outsider," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "These woods aren't for your kind." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry, I got lost. I'm just trying to find my way back to the trail. If you could point me in the right direction, I'll be on my way." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "There's no going back for you now. You've seen us. You know we're here." The others murmured in agreement, moving closer. I could smell them now, an earthy animal scent that made my nose wrinkle. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I won't tell anyone about you. I just want to go home." The leader studied me for a long moment, his eyes boring into mine. Finally, he spoke. "We'll discuss your fate in the morning. For now, you'll stay here where we can watch you." Two burly men grabbed my arms, their grips painfully tight. They led me to one of the smaller structures, little more than a shack, and shoved me inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the sound of a heavy bar being placed across it. The shack was dark and smelled of mold and decay. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a crude bed made of straw and animal skins. There was a small window, but it was covered with thick branches, allowing in only slivers of moonlight. I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. Who were these people? How long had they been out here? And what did they plan to do with me? Sleep was impossible. I spent the night listening to the sounds of the settlement, muffled conversations, the crackling of fires, and sometimes, disturbingly, what sounded like animalistic howls in the distance. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, the door to my prison opened. The leader stood there, flanked by two others. "Come," he said simply. They led me to the center of the clearing, where the entire community had gathered. Dozens of eyes watched me, some curious, others hostile. The leader spoke. "We've lived in these woods for generations, hidden from the outside world. We've survived by staying isolated, protecting our way of life. And now you threaten all of that." I opened my mouth to protest, to plead my case, but he held up a hand to silence me. "We can't let you leave," he continued. but we also can't dispose of you. It's not our way. So we offer you a choice. Stay with us, become one of us, or... He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. The alternative wasn't really an option at all. My mind raced. Could I really stay here, cut off from everything and everyone I knew? But what choice did I have? I thought of my family, my friends. Would I ever see them again? As if reading my thoughts, the leader spoke again. The outside world is poison, full of greed, corruption, and destruction. Here we live in harmony with nature. We take only what we need. We are free. I looked around at the faces watching me. Some were nodding in agreement with their leader's words. Others looked skeptical, even fearful. I realized that not everyone here was a willing participant in this isolated life. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here, cut off from the world. But I also couldn't abandon these people, some of whom clearly needed help. I understand, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. Your way of life is important to you, but surely there must be a middle ground. A way for you to protect your isolation while still allowing some contact with the outside world. For supplies, medical help if needed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The leader's eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. I can help you. I can be a bridge between your world and mine. No one else needs to know exactly where you are, but I could bring necessities, news from outside. And in return, you could teach me your ways of living in harmony with nature. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the leader nodded. You speak wisely, outsider. Perhaps there is more to you than we first thought. We will consider your proposal. That was 3 months ago. I'm back in the real world now, but I make regular trips into the woods, bringing supplies and serving as a discreet liaison for the hidden community. It's not a perfect solution, and I know that someday, inevitably, their existence will be discovered. But for now, I'm doing what I can to protect their way of life while slowly, carefully, introducing them to aspects of the outside world that might benefit them. The experience has changed me profoundly. I've learned to question the values of modern society, to appreciate the simplicity of a life lived close to nature. But I've also seen the dangers of complete isolation, of cutting oneself off from the wider world. As I hike through the familiar woods, no longer lost but forever changed, I often think about how close I came to disappearing completely. And I wonder how many others, over the years, made a different choice when confronted with the hidden people of the forest. The laughter died in my throat as I watched Tom's empty chair at the dinner table. Just moments ago, he had been sitting there, cracking jokes about the overcooked steak. Now, he was gone, vanished into thin air. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume our idyllic weekend getaway. My name is Emily, and what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation with friends turned into a fight for survival against an unseen predator. It all started when 6 of us, myself, my boyfriend Alex, and 2 other couples, Tom and Sarah, Mike and Lisa, decided to rent a lake house for a long weekend. We'd been planning this trip for months, eager to escape the chaos of city life and unwind in nature. The lake house seemed perfect when we arrived on Friday afternoon. Nestled in a secluded cove, it boasted panoramic views of the water and surrounding forest. The interior was rustic yet comfortable, with enough bedrooms for each couple and a spacious living area perfect for late-night board games and drinks. That first evening was everything we'd hoped for. We grilled on the deck, sharing stories and laughter as the sun set over the lake. As night fell, we gathered around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and enjoying the star-filled sky. It felt like we were in our own private paradise. Saturday started off just as promising. Mike and Tom went fishing early in the morning, while the rest of us enjoyed a lazy breakfast on the porch. Later, we all went for a swim in the crystal-clear lake waters. The day passed in a blur of sunshine, good food, and better company. It wasn't until dinner that everything changed. We were all seated around the large dining table, plates piled high with slightly overcooked steak, courtesy of Alex's questionable grilling skills. Tom had just finished telling a particularly corny joke, and we were all groaning good-naturedly. I turned to grab the salt shaker, and when I looked back, Tom's chair was empty. At first, I thought he'd just gotten up to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen, but as the seconds ticked by and he didn't return, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "Where's Tom?" Sarah asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. We called out for him, checked every room in the house, even looked outside. There was no sign of him. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. The mood shifted instantly from relaxed to tense. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd gone for a walk and we somehow hadn't noticed him leave. But deep down, we all knew something was terribly wrong. Tom wouldn't just disappear without a word, especially not in the middle of dinner. We decided to split up and search the surrounding area. Mike and Lisa took the path leading down to the lake, while Alex and I headed into the woods behind the house. Sarah stayed behind in case Tom came back. As Alex and I pushed through the dense underbrush, calling Tom's name, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful during the day, now felt oppressive and threatening. Shadows seemed to move at the corner of my vision, always disappearing when I tried to focus on them. After an hour of fruitless searching, we returned to the house, hoping the others had had better luck. But Mike and Lisa were already back, looking just as frustrated and scared as we felt. Sarah was in tears, pacing the living room. "We have to call the police," Lisa said, her voice shaking. Alex pulled out his phone, but the no service on message mocked us from the screen. We'd known cell reception was spotty out here, but now the lack of connection felt suffocating. "There's a landline in the kitchen," I remembered suddenly, but when I tried it, all I got was a dead tone. We were cut off, isolated, and one of us was missing. As the night wore on, our fear and paranoia grew. Every creak of the house settling made us jump. We huddled together in the living room, too afraid to be alone even for a moment. Around midnight, Sarah announced she needed some air and stepped out onto the porch. We heard the screen door slam shut behind her. Less than a minute later, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. We rushed outside, but Sarah was gone. The porch was empty, the surrounding darkness impenetrable. Panic set in. Mike started yelling, demanding that whoever was out there show themselves. Lisa broke down crying. Alex tried to calm everyone, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We retreated back into the house, locking every door and window. Sleep was out of the question. We took turns keeping watch, though what exactly we were watching for, none of us could say. As the first light of dawn broke over the lake, we made a desperate plan. Mike and Alex would take the car and drive to the nearest town for help. Lisa and I would stay at the house in case Tom or Sarah returned. I watched from the window as the guys got into the car. The engine sputtered to life, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as they started down the long driveway, the car suddenly veered off the path and into a tree. I saw Mike and Alex slump forward, motionless. Lisa and I ran outside, screaming their names. But before we could reach the car, a strange mist seemed to engulf it. When it cleared seconds later, the car was empty. Mike and Alex had vanished, just like the others. Overwhelmed with terror, Lisa and I sprinted back to the house. We barricaded ourselves in one of the bedrooms, pushing a heavy dresser in front of the door. We sat on the bed, clutching each other and sobbing. "What's happening?" Lisa whimpered. "Who's doing this to us?" I shook my head, unable to form words. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the impossible events of the past 24 hours. As the day wore on, we remained locked in that room, too terrified to leave even for food or water. We took turns watching the door while the other tried to rest. though real sleep was impossible. It was during one of my watches, as the sun was setting, that I heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the other side of the door. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I saw the doorknob slowly turning. I shook Lisa awake, pressing a finger to my lips to keep her quiet. We watched in horror as the doorknob turned further, then stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the dresser blocking the door began to slide across the floor as if pushed by an invisible force. Lisa and I pressed ourselves against the far wall, watching helplessly as the door swung open. But there was nothing there. No person, no monster, just an empty hallway. Then Lisa gasped, her eyes wide with terror. I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. There, reflected in the mirror on the opposite wall, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs too long to be human. Its face, if you could call it that, was a featureless void. As we watched, paralyzed with fear, the figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at us. I felt a tugging sensation, as if hooks had latched onto my very being and were trying to pull me towards the creature. Lisa screamed, and the spell was broken. We bolted from the room, running blindly through the house and out into the night. The forest swallowed us, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. I don't know how long we ran or in what direction. All I know is that eventually, we broke through the tree line and found ourselves on a road. A car was approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. We flagged it down, probably looking like mad women with our wild eyes and torn clothes. The elderly couple inside were clearly frightened by our appearance, but they took pity on us and drove us to the nearest police station. The authorities searched the lake house and surrounding area, but found no trace of our friends or the mysterious figure we'd seen. The official report chalked it up to a bizarre series of accidents and possible hallucinations brought on by stress and isolation. But Lisa and I know the truth. Something was hunting us that weekend, something not of this world. And sometimes, late at night, I still feel that tugging sensation, as if it's still out there, waiting to finish what it started. We were 6 friends who went to that lake house. Only 2 came back, and not a day goes by that I don't wonder about the others. Are they truly gone? Or are they out there somewhere, trapped in a nightmare from which they can't escape? One thing's for certain, I'll never set foot near that lake again. Some getaways are better left as distant memories, no matter how idyllic they might seem at first glance. The red light on the security camera blinked steadily, a silent sentinel in the corner of the lobby. I'd watched that light for countless nights, but tonight it seemed to pulse with an urgency that matched my racing heart. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, thick with tension and the faint scent of fear. Little did I know, my mundane night shift was about to plunge me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my job, my colleagues, and the very nature of the truth. My name is Jack, and I've been working as a night security guard at Evergreen Towers for the past 3 years. It's a massive office complex, all gleaming glass and polished chrome during the day, but at night it transforms into a labyrinth of shadows and echoing corridors. Most nights, my biggest challenge is staying awake. But not tonight. Tonight, everything changed. It started with a phone call. The shrill ring cut through the silence of the lobby, making me jump. I picked up the receiver, expecting it to be my supervisor or maybe one of the cleaning crew. "Security desk, this is Jack," I said, stifling a yawn. There was silence on the other end, then a woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "Help me, please, I'm trapped." I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Ma'am, where are you? What's your location?" "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "It's dark. There's no windows. Please, you have to find me before they come back." My mind raced. Was this a prank? Some kind of test from management? but the fear in her voice sounded all too real. "Okay, stay calm," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I'm going to help you. Can you tell me anything about where you are? Any details at all?" "It's cold," she whispered, and I can hear humming, like machinery. The basement. It had to be. That's where all the building's mechanical systems were housed. But how did she get down there? And who was holding her? "I'm on my way," I told her. "Stay on the line if you can." I grabbed my flashlight and radio, then hesitated. Protocol said I should call the police, wait for backup, but something told me there wasn't time. I had to act now. The elevator ride to the basement felt like it took hours. When the doors finally opened, I was hit by a blast of cold air and the low hum of machinery. I swept my flashlight across the dimly lit corridor, its beam catching on pipes and electrical boxes. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone down here?" No response. I moved deeper into the basement, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. Something was off about this whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. That's when I saw it. A door I'd never noticed before, tucked away in a corner behind some old filing cabinets. It was heavy steel with no handle on this side, just a keypad lock. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. Faintly, I could hear someone crying on the other side. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you in there? I'm here to help." The crying stopped abruptly. "Please," came the woman's voice, muffled by the thick door. "Get me out of here." I examined the keypad. 4 digits. I tried the building's standard security code, 1234. Nothing. I rattled off birthdays, anniversaries, any significant dates I could think of. Still, nothing. Frustration welled up inside me. I was so close, but this damn door was in my way. I considered trying to break it down, but it was solid steel. I'd probably break my shoulder before I made a dent. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam landing on a familiar face. It was Dave, one of the other night guards. "Jack, what are you doing down here?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I quickly explained the situation. Dave's expression grew more concerned with every word. "Jack," he said slowly, "there's no phone in the basement. And that door, it's always been there. It leads to the old fallout shelter. It's been sealed for years." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But I heard her," I insisted. "And she's in there right now." Dave gave me a look of pity. "Come on, man. Let's go back upstairs. I think you need some fresh air." But I couldn't let it go. I knew what I'd heard. As Dave turned to leave, I grabbed his arm. "Just help me open it, please. If there's nothing there, I'll drop it. I promise." Dave sighed, but nodded. "All right, but I'm telling you, it's sealed tight. Has been since before either of us started working here." He stepped up to the keypad and punched in a code. To my shock, the lock clicked open. "How did you—" I started to ask, but Dave cut me off. "Jack, I really think we should—" But I was already pushing the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, decades of disuse making them stiff. As the door swung wide, my flashlight illuminated the room beyond. It was empty. No woman, no signs of anyone being held captive. Just bare concrete walls and a few pieces of old furniture covered in dust. I stood there, dumbfounded. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? That's when I noticed something odd about the dust on the floor. There were footprints, fresh ones, leading further into the shelter. "Dave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "look at this." But when I turned around, Dave was gone. In his place stood a man I'd never seen before, dressed in a crisp black suit. Before I could react, he raised his hand. There was a flash of light, and then nothing. I woke up at my desk in the lobby, the morning sun streaming through the windows. My head was pounding, and I had a vague sense that something important had happened. but I couldn't remember what. As I gathered my things to leave, my supervisor walked in. "Morning, Jack," he said cheerfully. "Anything to report from last night?" I opened my mouth to speak, then hesitated. Flashes of memory danced at the edge of my consciousness. A phone call, a dark basement, a sealed door. But it all felt hazy, like a half-remembered dream. "No," I finally said. "All quiet." He nodded, satisfied, and walked away. But as I headed for the exit, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There, on the security camera feed, was an image of the basement, and in the corner, barely visible, was a door I'd never noticed before. Over the next few weeks, I tried to investigate further, but every time I got close to uncovering something, I'd find myself back at my desk, hours of time missing from my memory. My colleagues acted like nothing was amiss, but sometimes I'd catch them watching me with wary eyes. I know now that Evergreen Towers is more than just an office building. It's hiding something big, and whoever is behind it has the power to manipulate memories, to make people disappear. I'm writing this down now while I still can, because I have a feeling that soon, very soon, I might disappear too. If you're reading this, please, don't ignore it like I ignored that woman's pleas for help. Something is happening here, something terrifying, and I fear it's only the beginning. Remember the blinking red light, remember the sealed door, and whatever you do, don't trust anyone at Evergreen Towers, not even yourself. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless downpour, and I squinted through the blur, desperately searching for any sign of civilization. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. In that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I pulled over. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how a simple act of kindness turned into a nightmare that still keeps me up at night. It had been a long day. I was driving home from a conference 3 states away, and the torrential rain had slowed my progress to a crawl. I was tired, frustrated, and longing for the comfort of my own bed. When I saw the hitchhiker, my first instinct was to keep driving, but something about his bedraggled appearance tugged at my conscience. It was a miserable night to be stuck out here. I eased my car onto the shoulder, heart pounding as the man approached. He was tall and lean, with shaggy brown hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. As he opened the passenger door, I caught a whiff of wet dog and something else, something vaguely chemical. "Thanks for stopping," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I was beginning to think I'd be out here all night. "No problem," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said vaguely. "And I'll let you know when to drop me off." As I pulled back onto the highway, I snuck glances at my mysterious passenger. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably in his late 20s. His clothes were worn but clean, and he had an intensity about him that made me uneasy. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. Then he spoke, his voice low and oddly familiar. "So, Sarah, how was the conference?" I nearly swerved off the road. "How do you know my name? And how did you know I was at a conference?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, I know a lot about you, Sarah. I know you live at 1542 Elm Street. I know you have a golden retriever named Max. And I know you really shouldn't pick up strangers on nights like this." My mind raced. How could he possibly know these things? I'd never seen this man before in my life, had I? "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He turned to face me, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It was a look of hunger, of predatory anticipation. "Don't you recognize me, Sarah? I'm hurt. After all, we've met before. Many times, in fact. You just don't remember." Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of this man in places he shouldn't have been, at the grocery store, outside my office, walking Max in the park. How had I not noticed before? "What do you want from me?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's not about what I want, Sarah. It's about what you want, deep down, in places you don't like to admit exist. You're bored, aren't you? Tired of your safe, predictable life. That's why you picked me up tonight. You were hoping for a little excitement, a little danger." His words hit uncomfortably close to home. I had been feeling restless lately, dissatisfied with the routine of my life. But this was madness. "You're wrong," I said, more forcefully than I felt. "I picked you up because it was raining and I felt sorry for you. That's all." He laughed again, a sound that seemed to fill the car. "Oh, Sarah, always the good Samaritan, always trying to do the right thing. But we both know that's not the whole truth, is it?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. "I want you to get out of my car, now." "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You see, we're not done yet, not by a long shot." Panic surged through me. I had to get away from this man. I pressed down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward as I searched desperately for somewhere to turn off, somewhere with people. "That won't work, Sarah," he said calmly. "There's nowhere to go. It's just you and me out here." He was right. The road stretched out endlessly before us, empty and dark. I realized with growing horror that I had no idea where we were. How long had we been driving? It felt like hours had passed, but that couldn't be right. "What did you do to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing you didn't allow," he replied. "You let me in, Sarah. You opened the door." Suddenly, the car sputtered and died. We coasted to a stop on the side of the road, surrounded by darkness. I turned the key, but the engine refused to start. "Perfect timing," the man said, smiling that unsettling smile again. "Shall we continue our conversation outside?" "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He sighed, as if disappointed by my lack of cooperation. "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah, when will you learn? You don't have a choice in this, you never did." He reached for me, and I recoiled, fumbling for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. "Don't fight it," he said softly. "It'll be easier if you don't fight." As his hand closed around my arm, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. The world began to blur and shift, colors bleeding into one another. The last thing I remember is his voice, echoing as if from a great distance. "Welcome to your new reality, Sarah. I hope you enjoy the ride." I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented. Had it all been a dream? But as I sat up, I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, on my nightstand, was a small piece of paper. Written on it in an unfamiliar hand were the words, "Thanks for the lift. See you soon." In the weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had been some kind of hallucination, a product of stress and exhaustion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. I'd catch glimpses of the man everywhere I went, always just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, he'd be gone. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, even moved to a new apartment. But nothing helped. He was always there, watching, waiting. And the worst part was, a small part of me was excited by it. The danger, the mystery. It awakened something in me I hadn't known existed. Now, as I write this, I'm not sure what's real anymore. Am I losing my mind? Or did I really invite something sinister into my life that night on the rain-soaked highway? All I know is that I can't trust my own perceptions. Every stranger could be him. Every locked door could open at his touch. So let my story be a warning. The next time you see a hitchhiker on a dark and stormy night, Keep driving, because you never know who or what you might be letting into your life. And once they're in, they may never leave. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. As I coasted to a stop on the dusty shoulder, the realization hit me. I was alone, miles from civilization, with a useless hunk of metal and no cell service. Little did I know, my car trouble was about to become the least of my worries. My name is Mike, and I'm about to tell you how a simple road trip turned into a fight for survival against an evil I never knew existed. It was supposed to be a straightforward drive. I was heading to my sister's wedding, cutting through backcountry roads to save time. The scenery was beautiful, rolling hills, dense forests, and quaint farmhouses dotting the landscape. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road, the charm of the countryside gave way to an eerie silence. I'd been driving for hours when my car started acting up. The check engine light flashed on, and the vehicle began to lurch and stutter. I managed to pull over just as it gave out completely. Popping the hood, I stared at the engine, hoping for some obvious problem I could fix. But mechanics had never been my strong suit, and the maze of wires and metal might as well have been alien technology. Sighing, I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I was going to have to find help the old-fashioned way. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of lights, a farmhouse maybe half a mile down the road. It wasn't ideal, but it was my best shot at finding a phone or at least getting directions to the nearest town. As I walked, the silence pressed in around me. There were no sounds of crickets or night birds, just the crunch of gravel under my feet and my own breathing. The farmhouse grew closer, and I could make out more details. It was an old place, weathered wood siding, and a sagging porch roof. But there were lights on inside, and an old pickup truck parked out front. Someone was home. I approached the front door, rehearsing my plea for help in my head. But before I could knock, I heard voices from inside. They were muffled, but there was an urgency to them that made me pause. "We can't keep doing this," a woman's voice said, sounding strained. "Someone's gonna find out." "Ain't nobody gonna find out," a man replied gruffly. "We're careful. Always have been. But what if—" The woman's voice cut off abruptly as I accidentally kicked an empty can on the porch. The voices inside went silent. I held my breath, suddenly aware that I was eavesdropping on something I probably shouldn't have heard. The door swung open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and cold eyes. He looked me up and down, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear that he'd rather not. I swallowed hard, pasting on my most apologetic smile. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but my car broke down about half a mile back. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for a tow." The man stared at me for a long moment, then glanced over his shoulder at someone I couldn't see. When he turned back to me, there was a glint in his eye that sent a shiver down my spine. "Course," he said, his voice suddenly friendly. "Can't leave you stranded out here. Come on in." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I didn't have much choice. I needed help, and this was my only option. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking ominously under my feet. The interior of the farmhouse was dimly lit and cluttered. The air was thick with the smell of something I couldn't quite place, sweet and cloying, with an undertone of decay. A woman stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish rag. She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Phone's in the kitchen," the man said, gesturing for me to follow him. As we passed the woman, I noticed her knuckles were white where she gripped the dish rag. Her eyes met mine for a moment, and I saw something there that looked a lot like fear. The kitchen was large and old-fashioned, with a massive wood-burning stove dominating one wall. But what caught my attention was the cellar door. It was heavy and reinforced, with multiple locks on the outside. Who puts locks on the outside of a cellar door? The man pointed to an ancient rotary phone on the wall. There you go. You know the number for a tow? I didn't, but I figured I'd call the operator and get connected. As I picked up the receiver, I noticed the man positioning himself between me and the exit. The woman hovered in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and the cellar door. I dialed 0, praying for someone to pick up, but instead of a ring, all I heard was a flat, dead tone. The line was cut. "Something wrong?" the man asked, his voice far too calm. I set the receiver down slowly, my mind racing. Yeah. Seems like the line's dead." The man nodded, unsurprised. "Happens sometimes out here. Storms, you know." But there hadn't been any storms. The night was clear and calm. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate your help, but maybe I should just start walking. Try to find a gas station or something." The man's expression hardened. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. It's dangerous out there at night. Why don't you stay here? We've got a spare room. In the morning, I'll drive you into town myself." It wasn't a suggestion. The way he said it, the way he was blocking the door, made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. "That's very kind of you," I said, desperately trying to think of a way out of this situation. "But I really should get going. My sister's wedding is tomorrow, and I was cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold, a muffled scream coming from beneath our feet, from the cellar. The woman let out a small gasp, quickly stifled. The man's face darkened. "Now look what you've done," he growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "You've woken our guest." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I didn't get out of there right now, I never would. I feinted left, then dove right, trying to slip past the man. But he was faster than he looked. His hand clamped down on my arm like a vice, and he threw me against the wall with bone-jarring force. "Martha," he barked at the woman, "get the rope." I fought like a wild animal, kicking and clawing, but the man was impossibly strong. In moments, he had me pinned to the floor, my face pressed against the grimy linoleum. "You should have just kept driving," he muttered as he bound my hands behind my back. "But don't worry, you'll be joining our other guests soon enough." As he dragged me towards the cellar door, I caught a glimpse of Martha's face. There were tears in her eyes, but she made no move to help me. Whatever horrors lay beyond that door, she had long ago accepted them as inevitable. The locks clicked open one by one, and the heavy door swung wide. The stench that wafted up from the darkness below was indescribable, a mix of blood, waste, and despair. As the man began to drag me down the stairs, I closed my eyes, certain that I was descending into hell itself. I don't know how long I was in that cellar. Days blurred into weeks, marked only by the arrival of new guests and the disappearance of others. The things I saw, the things that were done to us, they defy description. But through it all, I never stopped looking for a way out. And then, one day, an opportunity presented itself. A new victim, brought in kicking and screaming, managed to injure the man. In the chaos that followed, I saw my chance. I won't go into the details of my escape. Suffice it to say, it was neither clean nor easy. But I made it out. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, I know you probably don't believe me. It sounds too horrific, too unreal. But I assure you, every word is true. And that farmhouse is still out there, tucked away on some forgotten back road. The man and woman are still there, still collecting unfortunate travelers. So the next time your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, think twice before you go looking for help, because you never know what kind of hell you might be walking into. And once you're in, getting out might cost you everything. The rusty door creaked open, revealing a cavernous space filled with shadows and forgotten dreams. As we stepped inside the abandoned warehouse, the stale air hit us like a wall, carrying the musty scent of decay and lost time. Little did we know that our urban exploration was about to uncover a darkness far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. I'm Alex, and this is the story of how a simple adventure with friends turned into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It was supposed to be just another Saturday night hanging out with my crew, Jake, Mia, and Chris. We were all in our early 20s, bored with the usual party scene and looking for something different. That's when Jake suggested we check out the old Riverside Industrial Complex on the outskirts of town. I heard it's been abandoned for years, he said, eyes gleaming with excitement. Think of all the cool stuff we might find in there. We were all up for it. The thrill of exploring somewhere we shouldn't be was too tempting to resist. So, armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of misplaced confidence, we set off as the sun was setting. The complex was massive, a sprawling reminder of our town's industrial past. Chain-link fences surrounded the property, topped with rusted barbed wire. But it didn't take us long to find a gap where the fence had been cut away, probably by other explorers before us. As we slipped through the opening, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The buildings loomed over us, their broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at us. For a moment, I hesitated. "Guys, are we sure about this?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the emptiness around us. "Don't tell me you're chickening out now, Alex," Chris teased. "Where's your sense of adventure?" Swallowing my unease, I followed them towards the largest building. The main entrance was boarded up, but we found a side door that yielded to Jake's persistent pushing. The interior was a maze of old machinery, conveyor belts frozen in time, and piles of debris. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing graffiti-covered walls and the occasional scurrying of what I hoped were just rats. We wandered deeper into the building, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. Mia was snapping photos, the flash momentarily illuminating our surroundings. "This place is incredible," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. That's when we heard it. A metallic clang, like something heavy being dropped, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. We all froze and looking at each other with wide eyes. "What was that?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "Probably just something falling over," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. "This place is old. Things are bound to make noise." We stood in silence for a moment, straining our ears. Then we heard it again, closer this time. And it definitely wasn't just something falling over. It sounded deliberate. "We should go," Chris said, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Now." But as we turned to leave, we realized something terrifying. In our excitement to explore, we had wandered so deep into the building that we weren't sure which way led back to the exit. "Okay, don't panic," Jake said, trying to sound calm. "We just need to retrace our steps." We started moving, faster now, our flashlights darting around as we tried to recognize something, anything that might point us towards the way out. But everything looked the same in the beam of our lights, just more machinery, more debris, more darkness. The sounds were getting closer. Now we could hear what sounded like voices, low and muffled, and footsteps, heavy and purposeful. "Hide," Mia hissed, pulling me behind a large piece of equipment. We crouched there, hardly daring to breathe, as the footsteps grew louder. Then, they stopped, right on the other side of our hiding spot. "I know you're in here," a gruff voice called out. "Come out now, and maybe we won't hurt you." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I looked at my friends, seeing my own terror reflected in their eyes. "Last chance," the voice said. "Come out, or we start searching. And trust me, you don't want that." Jake nodded at us, his face pale but determined. Slowly, we stood up, hands raised. There were 3 of them, large men, dressed in dark clothes, Kralger with faces that looked like they were carved from stone. But it wasn't their appearance that made my blood run cold. It was what they were carrying. Guns. And behind them, I could see more men, moving large crates. Well, well, the one who had spoken said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. What do we have here? A bunch of kids playing detective. We're sorry, I said, my voice shaking. We didn't know anyone was here. We'll leave right now and won't say a word to anyone. The man laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. Oh, I don't think so. You see, you've stumbled into something much bigger than you can imagine, and we can't just let you walk away. That's when I realized the true gravity of our situation. We hadn't just wandered into an abandoned building. We had stumbled upon some kind of criminal operation, and these men had no intention of letting us go. What happened next is still a blur in my mind. I remember running, the sound of shouts and gunshots behind us. I remember the panic, the desperate search for an exit, any exit. Somehow, we got separated. I found myself alone, lost in the labyrinth of the warehouse and with the sounds of pursuit echoing all around me. I ducked into what looked like an old office, my lungs burning as I tried to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. A window, small but big enough to squeeze through. And beyond it, the night sky. Freedom. With shaking hands, I managed to force the window open. It let out a loud creak, and I froze, sure that I had given away my position. But the footsteps I heard were moving away, not towards me. I was halfway out the window when I heard Mia's scream. It was distant, but unmistakable. For a moment, I hesitated. Could I really leave my friends behind? But then I heard more shouts, closer now, and my survival instinct took over. I tumbled out of the window, hitting the ground hard. Ignoring the pain, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until I reached the populated part of town, until I finally felt safe enough to stop. The police didn't believe me at first. It sounded too fantastical, too much like a plot from a movie. But when my friends didn't turn up, when their families reported them missing, they had to take it seriously. They searched the warehouse complex, but found nothing. No evidence of any criminal activity, no sign of my friends. It was as if that night had never happened. But I know what I saw. I know what we stumbled into, and I know that somewhere out there, Jake and Mia and Chris are either dead or wishing they were. I don't go out much anymore. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that those men are out there waiting to silence me for good. Every noise makes me jump. Every shadow could be a threat. Sometimes, I wish I had never made it out of that warehouse. The guilt of leaving my friends behind eats at me every day. But then I remember the terror of that night, the cold determination in those men's eyes. And I know that my survival wasn't just luck. It was a responsibility. So I'm telling this story, hoping that someone will believe me, that someone will help me find out what really happened in that warehouse. Because I can't shake the feeling that what we discovered that night was just the tip of something much larger and much more dangerous. And somewhere out there, in the abandoned places we think are empty, evil is still lurking, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. The first gunshot shattered the night silence like a thunderclap, jolting me awake from a fitful sleep. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. But as the echo faded, replaced by the sound of men shouting and branches snapping, I realized with growing horror that my peaceful getaway had just become a fight for survival. My name is Emma, and I never thought a solo trip to a remote cabin would turn me into prey. It was supposed to be a week of solitude and self-reflection. I'd been feeling burned out at work. My relationships were a mess, and I desperately needed to clear my head. When a friend offered me her family's cabin deep in the woods, it seemed like the perfect escape. The first few days were blissful. I hiked, read books by the fireplace, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being disconnected from the world. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just me and the great outdoors. But on the fourth night, Everything changed. The gunshot had come from somewhere to the east, maybe half a mile away. Close enough to hear clearly, far enough to give me hope that whatever was happening might pass me by. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor, and peered out the window. The moon was full, casting an eerie, silvery light over the forest. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, a flash of movement caught my eye, a figure darting between the trees, heading in my direction. My heart began to race. I backed away from the window, trying to think rationally. It could be nothing. A hunter, maybe, though it was the wrong season, or a hiker who'd gotten lost and fired a shot to signal for help. But deep down, I knew it was something far more sinister. I quickly pulled on jeans and a sweater, shoving my feet into hiking boots. My mind raced as I tried to form a plan. The cabin had no landline, and my cell phone was useless out here. I was on my own. The shouting was getting closer. I could make out individual voices now, gruff and angry. She went this way. Don't let her get away. Any hope I had that this wasn't about me evaporated. They were hunting someone, and that someone was close. Too close. I had seconds to decide. Stay in the cabin and hope they passed by, or run and risk being caught in whatever deadly game was playing out in these woods. The decision was made for me when I heard a frantic pounding on the cabin door. "Please, help me." A woman's voice, breathless and terrified. I hesitated for a split second, then ran to the door and yanked it open. She nearly fell into the cabin, gasping for air. She was young, maybe early 20s, with wild eyes and leaves tangled in her long dark hair. There was blood on her shirt. "They're coming," she panted. "Please, you have to hide me." I pulled her inside and locked the door, my mind whirling. Who's coming? What's going on? But there was no time for explanations. Outside, I could hear men crashing through the underbrush, getting closer by the second. "The cellar," I whispered, pointing to a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. "Quick!" We had just closed the trapdoor behind us when the cabin door burst open with a splintering crack. Heavy footsteps moved above us as the men entered. "Search every inch," a deep voice commanded. She couldn't have gotten far. The young woman and I huddled in the darkness of the cellar, hardly daring to breathe. I could feel her trembling beside me. Above us, furniture scraped across the floor as the men tore the cabin apart. "Nothing here, boss," one of them finally said. Maybe she kept running. "Impossible," the deep voice growled. "The dogs would have picked up her scent. No, she's close. I can feel it." My heart nearly stopped as I heard footsteps approach the kitchen. They paused right above the trapdoor. For a long, agonizing moment, all was silent. Then, mercifully, the footsteps moved away. "We'll set up a perimeter," the leader said. "She can't hide forever. By dawn, we'll have her." The men filed out of the cabin. As their voices faded into the distance, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you," the young woman whispered. "I'm Sarah." "Emma," I replied. "What the hell is going on? Who are those men?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with fear and exhaustion. "They're poachers, but not just any poachers. They're organized, professional. They hunt endangered species and sell them on the black market. I'm a wildlife biologist. I was tracking a pack of wolves when I stumbled upon their operation." The gravity of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just criminals. They were dangerous, well-equipped, and had every reason to want us silenced. "We need to get out of here," I said. "They'll be back at dawn." Sarah nodded. "But how?" "They're watching the cabin. And they have dogs." I thought hard, trying to remember everything I knew about the area. "There's a river about 2 miles west of here. If we can make it there, we might be able to throw off the dogs and find help downstream." It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We gathered what supplies we could from the cellar, some canned food, a flashlight, matches. I found an old hunting knife in a box of junk. It wasn't much against guns, but it was better than nothing. We waited until the moon had set, plunging the forest into near total darkness. Then, moving as silently as we could, we slipped out of the cellar and into the night. The woods were alive with nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Every snapping twig made us freeze, our hearts pounding. But slowly, painstakingly, we made our way west. We had covered maybe half the distance to the river when we heard it, the baying of dogs in the distance. The poachers had realized we'd fled. "Run!" I hissed, grabbing Sarah's hand. We tore through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. The dogs were getting closer, their howls sending chills down my spine. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I heard the sound of rushing water. The river appeared before us, a dark ribbon cutting through the trees. Without hesitation, we plunged in. The icy water stole my breath away, but I forced myself to keep moving. We let the current carry us downstream, fighting to keep our heads above water. Behind us, I could hear shouts of frustration as the poachers reached the riverbank. I don't know how long we drifted. It felt like hours. Finally, exhausted and half frozen, we managed to drag ourselves onto the opposite shore. As the first light of dawn began to break, we stumbled upon a hiking trail. It was another 2 hours of grueling walking before we finally reached a ranger station. The look on the ranger's face as we burst in, soaking wet, covered in mud and scratches, was one of utter disbelief. The authorities took our statements, and a massive investigation was launched. In the weeks that followed, the poaching ring was broken up, its members arrested. Sarah's evidence, combined with what we had witnessed, was crucial in bringing them to justice. But even now, months later, I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, the sound of baying dogs echoing in my dreams. I've moved to the city, as far from the wilderness as I can get. Sarah and I keep in touch, a friendship forged in the crucible of that terrifying night. I know I should feel safe. The danger has passed. The criminals are behind bars. But I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the dark woods of the world, other predators are waiting, and not all of them are animals. So I'll keep telling this story, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones who walk on two legs, and that even in our most peaceful moments, we must remain vigilant, because you never know when a simple getaway might turn into a fight for survival. The old floorboards creaked beneath our feet as we tiptoed through the darkened hallway, our hearts pounding in unison with each careful step. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a chance for Mark and I to reconnect away from the chaos of city life. But as we heard the heavy footsteps ascending the stairs, I realized with a sickening dread that our quaint countryside inn had become a trap, and we were the prey. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how our dream vacation turned into a nightmare that would haunt us forever. It had all started so perfectly. Mark and I had been drifting apart lately, both of us consumed by our demanding careers and the daily grind of urban living. When we found an ad for a charming bed and breakfast nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to rekindle our relationship. The Willow Creek Inn looked like something out of a fairy tale as we drove up the winding driveway. A beautiful Victorian-era house, surrounded by lush gardens and ancient willow trees. The innkeeper, a kindly old woman named Mrs. Abernathy, greeted us with warm smiles and freshly baked cookies. "You two are in for a treat," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We don't get many visitors this time of year. You'll have the whole place to yourselves." As she led us to our room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was exactly what we needed: peace, quiet, and time alone together. The first day was blissful. We explored the grounds, had a picnic by a babbling brook, and spent the evening cuddled up in front of a crackling fireplace. For the first time in months, I felt the tension melting away from my shoulders. Mark seemed more relaxed too, his smile coming easier, his laugh more frequent. It wasn't until our second night that things began to feel off. We had just finished a romantic dinner in the inn's dining room when we heard a car pull up outside. Curious, we peeked out the window to see a sleek black SUV parking next to our modest sedan. 3 men got out, all wearing dark suits despite the late hour. "Probably just some businessmen," Mark said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We retreated to our room, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. But as we lay in bed, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the inn had become. The usual creaks and settling noises of the old house were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. It was just past midnight when we heard it, hushed voices and footsteps in the hallway outside our room. Mark sat up, pressing a finger to his lips. We listened, hardly daring to breathe, as the voices grew closer. "Are you sure they're in this one?" a gruff voice asked. "Positive," another replied. Mrs. Abernathy confirmed it before we took care of her. A chill ran down my spine. Mrs. Abernathy. What had they done to her? Mark was already out of bed, pulling on his jeans and motioning for me to do the same. We had just finished dressing when the doorknob began to turn. In a moment of panic-driven inspiration, Mark wedged a chair under the doorknob. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy us some time. "Hey!" the voice on the other side shouted as the door refused to open. "They're awake. Break it down." The door shuddered as someone threw their weight against it. Mark grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the window. We were on the second floor, but there was a small balcony that ran along the side of the house. As we climbed out onto the balcony, I heard the door splinter behind us. Heavy footsteps entered the room. "They're on the balcony," someone yelled. We ran, our bare feet slapping against the cold wood. I could hear shouts and the sound of breaking glass as our pursuers gave chase. At the end of the balcony, Mark boosted me onto the sloping roof of the inn's sunroom. He scrambled up after me, and we carefully made our way across the slick shingles. "There," a voice called from below. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating us. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the night. I felt something whistle past my ear, and a small chunk of roofing material exploded near my foot. "Oh God," I whimpered. "They're shooting at us." Mark's face was grim in the moonlight. "We need to get to the car. It's our only chance." We reached the edge of the roof. Below us, I could see our car, tantalizingly close. But between us and freedom were our armed pursuers. "On 3, Mark whispered, gripping my hand tightly. 1, 2, 3. We jumped, landing hard on the soft earth of one of Mrs. Abernathy's flower beds. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. We sprinted for the car, zigzagging as more shots rang out behind us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as one of the men reached us. He slammed his fist against the driver's side window, spiderweb cracks appearing in the glass. Mark threw the car into reverse, peeling away from the inn in a spray of gravel. In the rearview mirror, I could see the men running for their SUV. "Who are they?" I gasped, my heart still racing. "What do they want with us?" Mark shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but we need to get to the police. Now." We sped through the winding country roads, the headlights of the SUV visible in our rearview mirror. Every time they got close, Mark would take a sharp turn or speed up, somehow managing to keep us just out of reach. As we crested a hill, I saw the welcoming lights of a small town in the distance. Hope surged through me. We were almost safe, but then, without warning, our car began to sputter and slow. "No, no, no," Mark muttered, frantically pressing the gas pedal. "Not now." The car rolled to a stop, steam billowing from under the hood. Behind us, I could see the SUV's headlights growing larger. "Run!" Mark shouted, already out of the car and pulling me with him. We dashed into a nearby field. the tall grass whipping at our legs as we ran. I could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting. The beam of a flashlight swept across the field. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like lead. But the sound of pursuit kept me going. We reached the edge of the field, where it bordered a dense forest. "In here," Mark panted, pulling me into the trees. We pushed through the underbrush, branches scratching at our faces and arms. Behind us, I could hear the men crashing through the forest, getting closer with each passing second. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. As we burst through the tree line, I realized we were on the outskirts of the town we'd seen earlier. There, I pointed to a police station just down the street, its windows still lit despite the late hour. With the last of our strength, we sprinted towards it. I could hear our pursuers emerging from the forest behind us, their shouts of frustration carrying on the night air. We burst into the police station, startling the officer at the desk. "Please," I gasped, collapsing against the counter. "Help us. They're trying to kill us." The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and cups of bad coffee. As dawn broke, we learned the truth. The men chasing us were part of a notorious crime syndicate. They had been using the inn as a front for their illegal operations, and Mrs. Abernathy had been their unwilling accomplice. When she'd tried to warn us, they'd silenced her, and then they'd come for us, seeing us as loose ends that needed tying up. In the days that followed, there were more questions, more statements. The police eventually caught the men who had chased us, but the leaders of the syndicate remained at large. Mark and I moved after that, unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability that had taken root that terrifying night. Our relationship, tested by fire, emerged stronger, but we both carry the scars of that experience, visible and invisible. Now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, the sound of footsteps in the hallway echoing in my mind. Mark holds me close on those nights, a silent reminder that we survived, that we're safe. But a part of me wonders if we'll ever truly feel safe again, because now we know that sometimes the most dangerous places are the ones that seem the most innocent, and that a dream vacation can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. The click of the lock echoed through the room like a gunshot, freezing Mark and me in place. We exchanged glances, our eyes wide with panic. This wasn't how our romantic getaway was supposed to end. Trapped in a stranger's home, with masked intruders on the other side of the door. But as the handle began to turn, I realized our quiet countryside retreat had just become a fight for survival. My name is Sarah, and what started as a second honeymoon turned into the most terrifying night of our lives. Mark and I had been married for 5 years, and like many couples, we'd fallen into a routine. Work, home, sleep, repeat. When we found a quaint bed and breakfast online, nestled in the rolling hills of a nearby rural county, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to rekindle our romance. The Willow Creek Inn was everything we'd hoped for. A beautiful Victorian-era house surrounded by gardens and towering oak trees. Mrs. Abernathy, the innkeeper, greeted us with warm smiles and freshly baked scones. "You two are in for a treat," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We don't get many visitors this time of year. You'll have the whole place to yourselves." The first day was blissful. We explored the grounds, had a picnic by a babbling brook, and spent the evening cuddled up in front of a crackling fireplace. For the first time in months, I felt the tension melting away from my shoulders. Mark seemed more relaxed too, his smile coming easier, his laugh more frequent. It wasn't until our second night that things began to feel off. We had just finished a romantic dinner in the inn's dining room when we heard a car pull up outside. Curious, we peeked out the window to see a sleek black SUV parking next to our modest sedan. 3 men got out, all wearing dark suits despite the late hour. "Probably just some businessmen," Mark said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We retreated to our room, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. But as we lay in bed, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the inn had become. The usual creaks and settling noises of the old house were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. It was just past midnight when we heard it. Hushed voices and footsteps in the hallway outside our room. Mark sat up, pressing a finger to his lips. We listened, hardly daring to breathe, as the voices grew closer. "Are you sure they're in this one?" a gruff voice asked. "Positive," another replied. "Mrs. Abernathy confirmed it before we took care of her." A chill ran down my spine. Mrs. Abernathy. What had they done to her? Mark was already out of bed, pulling on his jeans and motioning for me to do the same. We had just finished dressing when the doorknob began to turn. In a moment of panic-driven inspiration, Mark wedged a chair under the doorknob. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy us some time. "Hey!" the voice on the other side shouted as the door refused to open. "They're awake! Break it down!" The door shuddered as someone threw their weight against it. Mark grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the window. We were on the second floor, but there was a small balcony that ran along the side of the house. As we climbed out onto the balcony, I heard the door splinter behind us. Heavy footsteps entered the room. "They're on the balcony," someone yelled. We ran, our bare feet slapping against the cold wood. I could hear shouts and the sound of breaking glass as our pursuers gave chase. At the end of the balcony, Mark boosted me onto the sloping roof of the inn's sunroom. He scrambled up after me, and we carefully made our way across the slick shingles. "There," a voice called from below. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating us. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the night. I felt something whistle past my ear, and a small chunk of roofing material exploded near my foot. "Oh, God," I whimpered. "They're shooting at us." Mark's face was grim in the moonlight. "We need to get to the car. It's our only chance." We reached the edge of the roof. Below us, I could see our car, tantalizingly close. But between us and freedom were our armed pursuers. "On three," Mark whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "1, 2, 3. We jumped, landing hard on the soft earth of one of Mrs. Abernathy's flower beds. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. We sprinted for the car, zigzagging as more shots rang out behind us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as one of the men reached us. He slammed his fist against the driver's side window, spiderweb cracks appearing in the glass. Mark threw the car into reverse, peeling away from the inn in a spray of gravel. In the rearview mirror, I could see the men running for their SUV. "Who are they?" I gasped, my heart still racing. "What do they want with us?" Mark shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but we need to get to the police, now." We sped through the winding country roads, the headlights of the SUV visible in our rearview mirror. Every time they got close, Mark would take a sharp turn or speed up, somehow managing to keep us just out of reach. As we crested a hill, I saw the welcoming lights of a small town in the distance. Hope surged through me. We were almost safe, but then, without warning, our car began to sputter and slow. "No, no, no," Mark muttered, frantically pressing the gas pedal. "What, not now?" The car rolled to a stop, steam billowing from under the hood. Behind us, I could see the SUV's headlights growing larger. "Run!" Mark shouted, already out of the car and pulling me with him. We dashed into a nearby field, the tall grass whipping at our legs as we ran. I could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting. The beam of a flashlight swept across the field. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like lead, but the sound of pursuit kept me going. We reached the edge of the field, where it bordered a dense forest. "In here," Mark panted, pulling me into the trees. We pushed through the underbrush, branches scratching at our faces and arms. Behind us, I could hear the men crashing through the forest, getting closer with each passing second. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. As we burst through the tree line, I realized we were on the outskirts of the town we'd seen earlier. There. I pointed to a police station just down the street, its windows still lit despite the late hour. With the last of our strength, we sprinted towards it. I could hear our pursuers emerging from the forest behind us, their shouts of frustration carrying on the night air. We burst into the police station, startling the officer at the desk. "Please," I gasped, collapsing against the counter. "Help us. They're trying to kill us." The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and cups of bad coffee. As dawn broke, we learned the truth. The men chasing us were part of a notorious crime syndicate. They had been using the inn as a front for their illegal operations, and Mrs. Abernathy had been their unwilling accomplice. When she'd tried to warn us, they'd silenced her, and then they'd come for us, seeing us as loose ends that needed tying up. In the days that followed, there were more questions, more statements. The police eventually caught the men who had chased us, but the leaders of the syndicate remained at large. Mark and I moved after that, unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability that had taken root that terrifying night. Our relationship, tested by fire, emerged stronger, but we both carry the scars of that experience, visible and invisible. Now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, the sound of footsteps in the hallway echoing in my mind. Mark holds me close on those nights, a silent reminder that we survived, that we're safe. But a part of me wonders if we'll ever truly feel safe again, because now we know that sometimes the most dangerous places are the ones that seem the most innocent, and that a dream vacation can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. The last customer stumbled out into the night, leaving behind the stale scent of beer and broken dreams. I sighed, wiping down the bar one final time before closing. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from the storage room. My heart skipped a beat. I was supposed to be alone, but something told me this night was far from over. I'm Jenny, and I've been tending bar at the Rusty Nail for 3 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and I've grown fond of the regulars. Tonight, though, as I stood frozen behind the bar, straining my ears for another sound, I realized how vulnerable I truly was. The storage room door creaked open slowly, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't anyone I recognized. A man, tall and lean, with a face that seemed carved from stone. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "We're closed," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and weak even to my own ears. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm not here for a drink, Jenny." The fact that he knew my name sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I glanced at the phone behind the bar, calculating my chances of reaching it before he could stop me. As if reading my mind, he pulled out a gun, its metal gleaming dully in the low light. "I wouldn't if I were you," he said calmly. My mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want? And how the hell was I going to get out of this alive? "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "if this is a robbery, take whatever you want. There's cash in the register and—" He cut me off with a laugh. "This isn't about money, Jenny. This is about information. Information that I believe you have." I stared at him, bewildered. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a bartender." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Oh, I think you know more than you're letting on. You see, we've been watching this place for a while now. We know about the little side business your boss has been running, and we know that you're not just a simple bartender." My blood ran cold. It was true that I'd noticed some strange things happening at the bar lately. My boss, Mike, had been having a lot of private meetings in his office. There had been an increase in unfamiliar faces coming in, people who didn't seem like our usual clientele. But I'd chalked it up to Mike trying to drum up more business. "I really don't know anything," I insisted. "Whatever Mike's involved in, he hasn't told me about it." The man's expression hardened. "I don't believe you. And I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." He gestured with the gun towards the office door. "Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private, shall we?" I had no choice but to comply. As we walked towards the office, my mind raced, trying to piece together what little I knew. Mike had been acting strange lately, jumpy and secretive. There had been hushed phone conversations, mysterious packages delivered after hours, but I'd never imagined it was anything like this. Once in the office, the man forced me to sit in Mike's chair. He loomed over me, the gun never wavering. "Now," he said, "let's start with the shipments. When are they coming in?" I shook my head, genuinely confused. "I don't know anything about any shipments, I swear." His eyes narrowed. Wrong answer. Without warning, he backhanded me across the face. The force of the blow sent me sprawling out of the chair. I tasted blood in my mouth as I struggled to sit up. "Let's try this again," he growled. "The shipments. When and where?" Tears stung my eyes, partly from pain, partly from fear. "Please," I begged. "I really don't know what you're talking about. Mike doesn't tell me anything about the business side of things." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Perhaps you need some motivation to jog your memory." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. After dialing a number, he spoke quietly into it. "Bring him in." My heart sank. Who else had they captured? Minutes later, the office door opened again. 2 more men entered, dragging a battered and bloodied figure between them. It took me a moment to recognize him through the bruises and swelling, but when I did, I gasped. "Mike!" My boss lifted his head, his one good eye focusing on me. "Jenny," he croaked. "I'm so sorry." The first man, clearly the leader, smiled coldly. "Now then, Jenny, let's see if your memory improves with some company." What followed was a nightmare of questions, threats, and violence. They demanded information about shipments, contacts, drop-off points, none of which I knew anything about. Every time I couldn't answer, they hurt Mike. His cries of pain tore at my heart, but I truly had no information to give them. As the night wore on, I began to piece together bits of the puzzle. It seemed Mike had gotten involved with a rival gang, using the bar as a front for drug trafficking. The men interrogating us were from another organization, looking to take over the territory. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard sirens in the distance. The leader's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Seems like our time is up," he said. "One last chance, Jenny. Tell us what we want to know, or we finish this right now." I looked at Mike, slumped in the corner, barely conscious, then back at the man with the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe just blind luck, but I saw an opportunity and I took it. I lunged forward, catching the leader off guard. We grappled for the gun, its barrel swinging wildly. The other 2 men shouted, moving to help their boss. But in the chaos, Mike managed to summon the last of his strength. He tackled one of the men, sending them both crashing into the other. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small office. I felt a searing pain in my side, but I didn't let go. We crashed into Mike's desk, sending papers and a heavy paperweight flying. I managed to grab the paperweight and brought it down hard on the leader's head. He crumpled to the floor, the gun clattering away. I snatched it up, my hands shaking as I pointed it at the other 2 men. "Don't move," I gasped, trying to ignore the warm wetness spreading across my shirt. Just then, the office door burst open. Police officers flooded in, shouting orders. I dropped the gun, relief washing over me as the adrenaline faded and the pain intensified. The next few hours were a blur of ambulances, hospital rooms, and police questioning. It turned out one of our regulars, an off-duty cop who'd left just before closing, had noticed something off and called it in. Mike survived, though he faced a long recovery and even longer jail time. As for me, the bullet had grazed my side, painful, but not life-threatening. In the weeks that followed, as I healed and gave statements and tried to make sense of everything, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to death, how quickly an ordinary night had turned into a fight for survival. I don't work at the Rusty Nail anymore. These days, I'm much more careful about where I work and who I trust. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of that gunshot, still feel the weight of that gun in my hands. And I wonder how many other secrets are hiding behind the everyday facades we take for granted. One thing's for certain. I'll never look at a quiet night at the bar the same way again. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here, in this lavish house I'd been hired to show. But as I heard footsteps approaching from the kitchen, I realized with growing horror that I wasn't alone. Someone else had decided to pay an unexpected visit, and I had a sinking feeling they weren't here for a tour. My name is Rachel, and I've been a real estate agent for 5 years. It's usually a pretty straightforward job. Show houses, negotiate deals, help people find their dream homes. But on this crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened across the manicured lawn, I found myself trapped in a nightmare I never could have imagined. It had started as a routine showing. The Maple Grove property was a gem, a sprawling Victorian mansion with all the modern amenities, nestled on 5 acres of pristine woodland. I'd been thrilled when the sellers chose me to list it, seeing dollar signs in my future commission. The prospective buyers, a well-dressed couple in their 50s, had seemed genuinely interested during our afternoon tour. They'd asked all the right questions, admired the crown molding, and even discussed where they might put their grand piano in the spacious living room. As we wrapped up, the wife had suddenly remembered she'd left her scarf in the master bedroom. "Oh, don't worry about it," I'd said with a smile. "I'll grab it when I do my final walkthrough. You can pick it up at the office tomorrow." They'd thanked me and left, and I'd locked up, planning to return later that evening to retrieve the scarf and double-check that all the lights were off. It was a service I often provided for high-end listings, just to ensure everything was perfect for the next showing. Now, as I stood frozen in the entryway, I cursed my dedication to customer service. The scarf lay forgotten on a nearby table. I'd found it almost immediately upon entering, but before I could grab it and leave, I'd heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. My first thought was that the owners had returned unexpectedly, but as I heard low voices and the sound of heavy objects being moved, I knew this was something else entirely. I crept towards the kitchen, my heart racing. Through the partially open door, I could see 2 men I didn't recognize. They were dressed in dark clothing, and one was carrying what looked like a crowbar. "Check upstairs," the taller one grunted. "I'll start down here. Remember, we're looking for the safe. It's got to be here somewhere." Burglars. I was witnessing a break-in. My mind raced, trying to remember if I'd armed the security system when I entered. I didn't think I had. After all, I was planning to be in and out in just a few minutes. I backed away slowly, trying to figure out my next move. The front door was out. They'd surely hear me. My best bet was to find a place to hide and call the police. But as I reached for my phone, my blood ran cold. It wasn't in my pocket. With a sinking feeling, I remembered setting it down on the kitchen counter when I first walked in. The sound of footsteps on the stairs told me the second man was heading up. I had to move, and fast. I slipped into the nearby study, easing the door shut behind me. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the heavy curtains. I scanned the room desperately, looking for a hiding spot. The massive mahogany desk? Too obvious. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves? No good. Then I spotted it. A small door, almost hidden behind a potted plant. The entrance to a dumbwaiter, an old-fashioned feature that had charmed the prospective buyers earlier that day. Without hesitation, I squeezed inside, pulling the door closed just as I heard someone enter the study. Through the slats in the door, I could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the room. "Nothing in here," a voice called out. "You find anything upstairs?" "Nah," came the reply. "But keep looking. That safe's gotta be somewhere." I held my breath as the man in the study moved around, opening drawers and tapping on walls. Every second felt like an eternity. What if they found me? What would they do? Just when I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, I heard a shout from upstairs. "Hey, I think I found something." The man in the study rushed out, and I let out a shaky breath. But my relief was short-lived. I was still trapped, with no way to call for help. I waited a few minutes, straining my ears for any sound of the intruders returning. When I was sure the coast was clear, I slowly eased the dumbwaiter door open and crept out. The house was silent, but I knew the burglars were still here somewhere. I had to get to my phone and call for help. Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way towards the kitchen. I had just reached the doorway when I heard a triumphant shout from upstairs. "Got it!" The safe was behind a painting in the master bedroom. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. I ducked behind a large potted plant, praying they wouldn't come into the kitchen. But luck wasn't on my side. The two men burst in, their faces flushed with excitement. "Let's get this thing open and get out of here," the taller one said, hefting a small safe onto the kitchen island. That's when I saw it. My phone, still sitting on the counter where I'd left it. It was so close, yet impossibly far away. If I could just reach it. As the men focused on cracking the safe, I inched forward, my hand stretching out towards my lifeline. Just a little further. My fingers closed around the phone and I nearly sobbed with relief. But as I started to retreat, my elbow knocked against a vase. It teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then crashed to the floor. The burglars whirled around, their eyes locking onto me. For a moment, we all froze, equally shocked by the other's presence. Then, chaos erupted. I bolted for the back door, fumbling with the lock as shouts and curses filled the air behind me. I burst out into the cool night air, my lungs burning as I sprinted across the lawn. I could hear them in pursuit, their heavy footfalls getting closer with each passing second. I veered towards the woods at the edge of the property, hoping to lose them in the darkness. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the woods, getting closer. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the air rushing out of my lungs. As I struggled to my feet, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me around. I found myself face to face with the taller burglar, his eyes wild with anger and fear. "You shouldn't have been here," he growled, raising his fist. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the groin. He doubled over with a grunt of pain, and I took off running again. I don't know how long I ran or in what direction. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to find help. Finally, I burst out of the woods onto a residential street. Lights were on in several houses, and I could hear the distant wail of sirens. I collapsed on the nearest front lawn, gasping for breath. The homeowner, an elderly woman in a bathrobe, peered out at me in concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she called. "Should I call the police?" I nodded, still too winded to speak. As she disappeared inside, I finally looked at the phone clutched in my hand. Somehow, through it all, I'd managed to hold on to it. The police arrived minutes later, followed closely by an ambulance. As I gave my statement and had my cuts and bruises tended to, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd walked into a burglary in progress, been chased through the woods, and somehow made it out alive. The routine showing had turned into the most terrifying night of my life. In the days that followed, as the police investigated and I dealt with the aftermath, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had taken root that night. Every house I showed felt like a potential trap, every client a possible threat. But I also felt a newfound strength. I'd faced my worst fear and survived. And while I knew I'd never forget that night, I was determined not to let it define me. Now, when I turn the key in a lock, I'm always aware of what might be waiting on the other side, but I'm also ready for it, whatever it might be. Because sometimes, the most dangerous situations can reveal strengths we never knew we had. The soft hum of machinery was the only sound in the dimly lit corridor as I made my final rounds. It was 2 a.m., and the research facility was eerily quiet. I'd been working as a night janitor here for months, but something felt different tonight. The air was thick with tension, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I never could have imagined that in a matter of minutes, my mundane job would thrust me into a nightmare of corporate espionage and deadly secrets. My name is Carlos, and this is the story of how I uncovered a conspiracy that nearly cost me everything. I'd taken the night shift job at Genticor Laboratories to help pay for my sister's medical bills. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid better than most janitorial positions, thanks to the strict confidentiality agreements we had to sign. Genticor was at the forefront of genetic research, and they guarded their secrets zealously. That night started like any other. I cleaned the offices, emptied trash bins, and mopped floors. But as I approached the main research lab on the 3rd floor, I noticed something unusual. The door was ajar, and a faint light spilled out into the hallway. I frowned. The lab was supposed to be locked and empty at this hour. Thinking perhaps one of the scientists had forgotten to turn off a computer, I pushed the door open wider. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. 2 figures in dark clothing were hunched over a computer terminal, furiously typing and downloading files onto a portable drive. They weren't any scientists I recognized, and the ski masks they wore made their intentions clear. I must have made a sound because suddenly, both figures whirled around. For a moment, we all froze, equally shocked by the other's presence. Then, chaos erupted. One of the intruders lunged at me while the other frantically tried to finish the download. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I had to alert security, but the nearest alarm was at the end of the hall. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, gaining quickly. Just as I reached for the alarm, a hand grabbed my collar, yanking me backward. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. As I gasped for air, a face loomed over me, eyes cold behind the ski mask. "You shouldn't have seen this," a gruff voice said. "Now we have a problem." Fear coursed through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. These weren't simple thieves, they were corporate spies, and I was a loose end. In a desperate move, I kicked out, catching my attacker off guard. He stumbled back, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. I slammed my hand on the alarm, and immediately, the hallway was filled with the piercing wail of sirens. The intruders cursed, and I heard the sound of running feet. But I couldn't focus on that now. I had to find a safe place to hide until security arrived. I ducked into a nearby supply closet, wedging myself behind shelves of cleaning products. My heart was racing so fast I was sure they would hear it. Minutes passed like hours as I waited, straining to hear any sound over the blaring alarm. Finally, I heard shouts and the sound of security guards running down the hall. I let out a shaky breath, thinking the danger had passed. I couldn't have been more wrong. As I stepped out of the closet, a hand clamped over my mouth, and I was dragged backward into an empty office. I found myself face to face with one of the intruders. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "You're going to tell security you saw someone running away. You didn't get a good look, understand?" I nodded, too terrified to do anything else. "Good. Because if you say anything else, we know where you live. We know about your sister. Don't test us." He shoved me out of the office just as security rounded the corner. I gave them the story the intruder had fed me, my voice shaking. They seemed to buy it, thanking me for sounding the alarm and asking me to give a formal statement in the morning. As I watched them continue their search, guilt and fear warred within me. What had I just become complicit in? The rest of the night passed in a blur. I went through the motions of finishing my shift, but my mind was racing. What had the intruders been after? How did they know about my sister? And what would happen if I told the truth? When I finally got home, exhausted and on edge, I found a note taped to my door. Remember, not a word. The next few days were a nightmare of paranoia. I jumped at every shadow, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I gave my statement to the company's security team, I stuck to the story, hating myself for every lie. But as the investigation continued, I noticed strange things happening. Key card logs were altered. Security camera footage went missing. It was clear that someone on the inside was covering up what had really happened that night. Unable to shake the feeling that I was in way over my head, I decided to do some digging of my own. I started paying closer attention to the scientists' conversations, noting which projects seemed to be causing the most stress. It was during one of these eavesdropping sessions that I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Two researchers were arguing in hushed tones about the ethical implications of their latest project, something called Operation Lazarus. "We're playing God here," one of them said. "But if this gets out, it'll make the human cloning debate look like a schoolyard argument." I didn't understand all the scientific jargon, but I got the gist. Gentacor was working on something big, something that pushed the boundaries of science and ethics, and someone was willing to kill to get their hands on it. Armed with this new information, I faced a difficult choice. I could keep my head down, stay quiet, and hope that the danger would pass. Or I could try to uncover the truth and potentially put myself and my sister at risk. In the end, the decision was made for me. When I arrived at work the next night, I found the lab in chaos. There had been a fire, destroying key research materials. As I helped clean up the debris, I overheard the CEO talking to the head of security. "This was no accident," he said grimly. "Someone's trying to stop our research. Find out who's behind this, whatever it takes." I realized then that the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. Lives were at risk, possibly including my own. Over the next week, I became an amateur detective. I used my access as a janitor to snoop through offices after hours, piecing together bits of information. I discovered that Operation Lazarus was a revolutionary gene therapy that could potentially cure a wide range of genetic disorders, but it could also be used to enhance human abilities beyond natural limits. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous my position became. I was sure I was being watched, both at work and at home. Twice, I spotted the same car following me on my way home. Just when I thought I was in too deep, I found an unexpected ally. Dr. Chen, one of the lead researchers, approached me one night as I was cleaning her office. "I know you saw something the night of the break-in," she said quietly. "And I know you've been investigating. You're in danger, Carlos." She explained that she had been growing increasingly concerned about the ethical implications of their work. She believed that someone within the company was planning to sell the research to the highest bidder, regardless of how it might be used. "I can help you expose the truth," she said, "but we have to be careful. They're watching both of us." Together, we hatched a plan. Using her access and my ability to move around the facility unnoticed, we gathered evidence of the conspiracy. It was dangerous work. Twice, we nearly got caught. But finally, we had enough to go to the authorities. The night we planned to leave with the evidence, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared as we tried to exit the building. Security guards and men in dark suits swarmed the halls. In the chaos, Dr. Chen and I got separated. I managed to slip out a side exit, the flash drive with our evidence clutched tightly in my hand. As I ran towards my car, I heard gunshots behind me. My heart sank as I realized Dr. Chen might not have made it out. The next few days were a blur of police interviews and media frenzy. The story broke wide open. A cutting-edge biotech company, groundbreaking research with terrifying potential, and a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of corporate leadership. In the end, Several Genticor executives were arrested. The company's stock plummeted, and the future of Operation Lazarus was uncertain. Dr. Chen survived her injuries and was hailed as a whistleblower. As for me, I was offered a hefty settlement in exchange for my silence about certain aspects of the case. I used the money to pay off my sister's medical bills and start a small business of my own. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the terror of those nights at Genticor. I've learned that sometimes the most ordinary jobs can lead us into extraordinary and dangerous situations, and that the choice to do the right thing, no matter the cost, can change everything. The antique mirror in the hallway caught my eye, reflecting a shadow that shouldn't have been there. I blinked, and it was gone. But as I turned back to the pile of mail I'd been sorting, a chill ran down my spine. I was supposed to be alone in this sprawling mansion, but a creeping sensation told me otherwise. Little did I know, my comfortable job as a house-sitter was about to plunge me into a terrifying game of cat and mouse with an intruder I couldn't see. My name is Olivia, and I've been house-sitting for the wealthy and elite for the past 5 years. It's a cushy gig, living in luxurious homes, caring for pampered pets, and generally enjoying the lifestyle of the rich and famous, while their actual owners are away on extended vacations or business trips. The Thornton estate was my most impressive assignment yet, a 10,000 square foot Victorian mansion set on 20 acres of manicured grounds. The Thorntons, a reclusive tech billionaire and his socialite wife, had left for a 3-month world tour. They'd given me a thorough tour of the house before they left, pointing out the state-of-the-art security system, the army of groundskeepers and cleaners who would be coming and going, and the extensive list of daily tasks to keep their home running smoothly. For the first 2 weeks, everything was perfect. I spent my days lounging by the pool, exploring the vast library, and taking long walks in the immaculately landscaped gardens. But then, little things started to feel off. It began with small inconsistencies. A book I was sure I'd left on the coffee table would be back on the shelf. The temperature in rooms would change inexplicably. Once, I could have sworn I heard footsteps upstairs when I was in the kitchen, but when I went to check, all the rooms were empty. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settle. My memory was playing tricks on me. The advanced climate control system was just doing its job, but the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. Then came the night of the mirror incident. I'd been sorting through the day's mail when I saw that shadow, there and gone in an instant. It was the first time I couldn't explain away the oddities with logic. Someone, or something, was in the house with me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, straining my ears for any sound out of place. Just as I was drifting off, a soft thud from downstairs jolted me back to full alertness. My heart raced as I slipped out of bed, grabbing my phone and the heavy flashlight I kept on the nightstand. I crept down the grand staircase, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. The house was dark, shadows stretching ominously in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it again, a soft scraping sound coming from Mr. Thornton's study. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 on my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. I approached the study door, which stood slightly ajar. Gathering my courage, I pushed it open wider, shining my flashlight into the room. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. The study was empty, everything in its place. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish. Maybe I had imagined it all. That's when I saw the desk drawer. It was open just a crack, but I knew for certain it had been closed earlier. My blood ran cold as I realized someone had been in here, searching for something. I backed out of the study, my eyes darting around wildly. The intruder could still be in the house. I needed to get out, to call for help. But as I turned to run, I collided with something solid, something that shouldn't have been there. A hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream. Not a sound. A low voice growled in my ear. "Or this gets very unpleasant for you." Terror coursed through me as I was marched back into the study. My captor pushed me into a chair, finally releasing his grip. In the dim light, I could make out a man dressed all in black, his face obscured by a ski mask. "Where is it?" he demanded. I stared at him, confused and terrified. "Where's what?" "Don't play dumb," he snarled. "The safe? Where's Thornton's safe?" My mind raced. I knew there was a safe in the house. The Thorntons had mentioned it during the tour, but they hadn't told me where it was located. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "They didn't tell me." The man's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "You expect me to believe that? You've been living here for weeks. You must have seen them access it." I shook my head vehemently. "I swear, I don't know. They keep their valuables in a safety deposit box. The safe could be anywhere in this huge house." He studied me for a long moment, then seemed to deflate slightly. "Damn it," he muttered. "All right, here's how this is going to go. You're going to help me search this place room by room. If I find out you're lying or trying to trick me..." He let the threat hang in the air. For the next 2 hours, we moved methodically through the mansion. The intruder was thorough, checking behind paintings, tapping on walls, and scrutinizing every bookshelf for hidden compartments. All the while, my mind was working overtime, trying to figure out a way to alert someone or escape. As we entered Mr. Thornton's massive walk-in closet, an idea struck me. "Wait," I said, pointing to a section of the wall. I think I remember something. Mrs. Thornton mentioned a hidden panel somewhere in here." The intruder's eyes lit up with excitement. As he moved to examine the wall, I subtly pressed a small button on my watch, a panic button connected to the house's security system. I prayed it would work silently, alerting the authorities without tipping off my captor. "There's nothing here," he growled after a few minutes of searching. He turned back to me, anger flashing in his eyes. "You're stalling." I backed away, hands raised. "No, I swear. I thought I remembered." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm roughly. "No more games. You're going to show me where that safe is, or..." He was cut off by the sudden blare of alarms. Red lights began flashing throughout the house, and a computerized voice announced, "Security breach detected. Authorities have been notified. All exits are now sealed." The intruder cursed, shoving me aside as he ran for the door, but true to the announcement, it wouldn't budge. We were locked in. What followed was a terrifying game of hide and seek. The intruder, realizing he was trapped, became desperate. He searched frantically for a way out, all the while hunting for me. I managed to slip away in the chaos, hiding in a secret passage I'd discovered during my explorations of the house. From my hiding spot, I could hear him raging, tearing the place apart in his desperation. Tears streamed down my face as I huddled in the darkness, praying for the police to arrive quickly. After what felt like an eternity, I heard new voices, authoritative shouts, and the sound of breaking glass. The police had finally arrived. When it was all over, I emerged shaken but unharmed. The intruder was arrested, and I learned he was part of a sophisticated ring of thieves targeting wealthy homes. The Thorntons, it turned out, had a collection of priceless artifacts hidden in a safe I never knew existed. In the days that followed, as I gave statements to the police and tried to process what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. The home that had been my sanctuary had become a place of terror. The Thorntons, upon hearing what happened, offered me a generous bonus and glowing recommendations. But I knew my days of house-sitting were over. The experience had shown me how vulnerable we can be, even in the most secure environments. Now, years later, I still sometimes wake up in the night. Sure, I've heard a floorboard creak or seen a shadow move. The fear never fully goes away, but I've learned to trust my instincts, to be aware of my surroundings, and to never take safety for granted. Because sometimes, The most dangerous threats are the ones we invite into our homes without even realizing it. And in the end, our greatest defense is our own awareness and quick thinking. The rhythmic patter of rain against my windshield was suddenly interrupted by a flash of movement on the roadside. A figure, hunched and desperate, thumb outstretched. I hesitated for a split second before pulling over, my instinct to help overriding the nagging voice of caution in the back of my mind. As the stranger climbed into my car, I had no idea that this simple act of kindness would lead me down a dark and terrifying path. My name is Jack, and I've always prided myself on being a good Samaritan. Growing up in a small town, helping others was second nature. But on this stormy night, as I drove home from a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, my compassion would be tested in ways I never imagined. The man who slid into my passenger seat was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to a lean frame. He had a scruffy beard and deep-set eyes that darted around nervously before settling on me. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice gruff but grateful. Not many people would have in this weather. I smiled, trying to put him at ease. "No problem. Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he replied vaguely. "I'll let you know when to stop." As I pulled back onto the empty highway, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The man's vague destination, his nervous energy, something felt off. But I pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to too many late-night crime shows. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the swish of windshield wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I was about to attempt some small talk when the man spoke. "So, Jack," he said casually, "how's life treating you?" I froze, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I hadn't told him my name. Before I could respond, he continued, his tone shifting from casual to menacing. "I bet it's pretty good, living in that nice house on Elm Street, with your golden retriever, Max, isn't it?" My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know these details about my life? "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "How do you know these things?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Jack, I know a lot about you. I've been watching you for quite some time now." My mind raced, trying to process this information. Had this man been stalking me? Why? What did he want? "What do you want from me?" I asked, fighting to keep my eyes on the road as panic threatened to overwhelm me. "It's not about what I want, Jack," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "It's about what you want. Deep down, in places you don't like to admit exist. You're bored, aren't you? Tired of your safe, predictable life. That's why you picked me up tonight. You were hoping for a little excitement, a little danger." His words hit uncomfortably close to home. It was true that I'd been feeling restless lately, dissatisfied with the routine of my life. But this was madness. "You're wrong," I said, more forcefully than I felt. "I picked you up because it was raining and I felt sorry for you. That's all." He laughed again, a sound that seemed to fill the car. "Oh, Jack. Always the good Samaritan, always trying to do the right thing. But we both know that's not the whole truth, is it?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. "I want you to get out of my car. Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You see, we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." Panic surged through me. I had to get away from this man. I pressed down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward as I searched desperately for somewhere to turn off, somewhere with people. "That won't work, Jack," he said calmly. "There's nowhere to go. It's just you and me out here." He was right. The road stretched out endlessly before us, empty and dark. I realized with growing horror that I had no idea where we were. How long had we been driving? It felt like hours had passed, but that couldn't be right. "What did you do to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing you didn't allow," he replied. "You let me in, Jack. You opened the door." Suddenly, the car sputtered and died. We coasted to a stop on the side of the road, surrounded by darkness. I turned the key, but the engine refused to start. "Perfect timing," the man said, smiling that unsettling smile again. "Shall we continue our conversation outside?" "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He sighed, as if disappointed by my lack of cooperation. Jack. When will you learn? You don't have a choice in this. You never did." He reached for me, and I recoiled, fumbling for the door handle. But it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. "Don't fight it," he said softly. "It'll be easier if you don't fight." As his hand closed around my arm, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. The world began to blur and shift, colors bleeding into one another. The last thing I remember is his voice, echoing as if from a great distance. "Welcome to your new reality, Jack. I hope you enjoy the ride." I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment I lay there, disoriented. Had it all been a dream? But as I sat up, I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, on my nightstand, was a small piece of paper. Written on it in an unfamiliar hand were the words, "Thanks for the lift. See you soon." In the weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had been some kind of hallucination, a product of stress and exhaustion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. I'd catch glimpses of the man everywhere I went, always just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, he'd be gone. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, even moved to a new apartment. But nothing helped. He was always there, watching, waiting. And the worst part was, a small part of me was excited by it. The danger, the mystery. It awakened something in me I hadn't known existed. I found myself taking more risks at work, volunteering for the most challenging cases. I started going out more, seeking out new experiences in unfamiliar places. It was as if that night had unlocked a part of me that had been dormant for years. But with this newfound excitement came a constant undercurrent of fear. Every stranger could be him. Every locked door could open at his touch. I lived in a state of perpetual alertness, both dreading and anticipating our next encounter. It came on a rainy night, much like the one where it all began. I was walking home from a late shift, the streets empty and slick with rain. As I turned onto my street, I saw him standing under a streetlight, that same unsettling smile on his face. "Hello, Jack," he said as I approached. "Ready for another ride?" I should have run. I should have called for help. But instead I found myself nodding, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursing through me. As we walked towards his car, I realized that I had changed. The old Jack would never have agreed to this, would have fought against the danger and the unknown. But this new Jack, the one born on that fateful rainy night, craved the thrill of the unexpected. "Where are we going?" I asked as I slid into the passenger seat. He grinned, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "Wherever the road takes us, Jack. Are you ready for that?" As we drove off into the night, the rain pounding on the roof, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had opened a door to a world of shadows and secrets, of danger and excitement, and despite the fear that still gnawed at me, I couldn't bring myself to close it. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, I'm not sure what's real anymore. Am I losing my mind? Or did I really invite something sinister into my life that night on the rain-soaked highway? All I know is that I can't trust my own perceptions. Every stranger could be him. Every locked door could open at his touch. So let my story be a warning. The next time you see a hitchhiker on a dark and stormy night, think twice before stopping. Because you never know who or what you might be letting into your life. And once they're in, they may never leave. The faint click of a camera shutter made me freeze, my hand halfway to the light switch. It was 3 a.m., and I was alone in my apartment, or at least, I should have been. As I slowly turned towards the sound, my blood ran cold. There, in the darkness of my living room, a red recording light blinked steadily. Someone was watching me, and I had a sinking feeling this wasn't the first time. My name is Emma, and I never imagined that moving into my dream apartment would turn into a waking nightmare. It all started 3 months ago when I finally saved up enough for a down payment on a gorgeous loft in the heart of the city. The building was a recently renovated factory, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings. I fell in love with it instantly. The real estate agent gushed about the smart home's features, automated lighting, climate control, and a state-of-the-art security system. It seemed perfect. The first few weeks were blissful. I reveled in the space, the light, the sense of finally having a place that was truly mine. But then, little things started to feel off. It began with small inconsistencies. I'd come home to find lights on that I was sure I'd turned off. The thermostat would be set to temperatures I didn't remember changing. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my TV on, playing a show I'd never seen before. I chalked it up to forgetfulness, to the quirks of a new place. But the feeling of unease grew. I started to feel like I was being watched, even when I was alone. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. Then came the night I heard the camera shutter. I stood frozen, staring at the blinking red light in my living room. My mind raced. How long had it been there? What else was hidden in my apartment? With shaking hands, I turned on the lights and began to search. In the next hour, I found 3 more cameras, one in my bedroom, one in the bathroom, and another in the kitchen. They were small, expertly hidden. If I hadn't been looking for them, I never would have noticed. I felt violated, exposed. Who was watching me, and why? My first instinct was to call the police, but as I reached for my phone, a thought stopped me cold. What if they were in on it? What if this was bigger than just my apartment? I needed to think, to plan. I couldn't stay here, not with those cameras watching my every move. But I couldn't let whoever was behind this know that I'd discovered their surveillance. I grabbed a bag and started packing, trying to act as normal as possible. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, anything I might need for a few days away. I called a friend, keeping my voice casual as I asked if I could crash at her place for a bit. I just need a change of scenery, I said, hoping my voice didn't betray my panic. As I left my apartment, I noticed my neighbors for the first time. Had they always watched me this intently? The elderly couple across the hall, the young professional next door. Their gazes seemed to follow me as I walked to the elevator. I spent the next few days at my friend's place, paranoid and jumpy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I scoured the internet for information on hidden cameras, on stalking, on surveillance technology. The more I read, the more terrified I became. It wasn't just my apartment. People all over the city were reporting strange occurrences, unexplained noises, feelings of being watched, electronics behaving erratically. Most were brushed off as paranoia or technical glitches, but I knew better. I needed to know more. Under the guise of picking up more clothes, I returned to my apartment. This time, I came prepared. I had borrowed a signal detector from a tech-savvy coworker, claiming I suspected my ex of planting bugs in my car. The moment I stepped into my apartment, the detector went crazy. It wasn't just cameras. The place was riddled with listening devices, too. But the signals weren't just coming from inside my apartment. They were coming from everywhere in the building. Heart pounding, I followed the signals. They led me to a locked door in the basement, one I'd never noticed before. The sign read, "Maintenance authorized personnel only." But the signal detector told a different story. Whatever was behind that door was the source of the surveillance. I knew I should leave, call the authorities, do something sensible. But the need to know, to understand what was happening, overrode my common sense. Using the lock-picking skills I'd learned from countless YouTube videos over the past few days, I managed to open the door. What I found inside made my blood run cold. The room was filled with monitors, each displaying feeds from different apartments in the building. I saw my neighbors going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. And there, on one screen, was my empty apartment, but it wasn't just our building. There were feeds from all over the city, offices, restaurants, parks. Everywhere people gathered, hidden cameras were watching. As I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to find my neighbor, the young professional from next door, standing in the doorway. But he didn't look surprised to see me there. He looked expectant. "We've been waiting for you to figure it out, Emma," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're more observant than most. That's why we chose you." "Chose me?" I stammered. "For what?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "To join us, of course. We've been watching you, evaluating you. You've passed the test." As he spoke, more people filed into the room. I recognized them all. My neighbors, the real estate agent who'd sold me the apartment, even the barista from my favorite coffee shop. They formed a circle around me, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "What is this?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Some kind of cult." The man who'd been my neighbor laughed. "Oh, Emma, this is so much bigger than that. We're the Watchers. We see everything, know everything. And now, you're one of us." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. It was too bizarre, too terrifying to be real. But as I looked at the screens, at the hundreds of lives being monitored and recorded, I knew it was all too real. "And if I refuse?" I asked, already knowing the answer. His smile turned cold. "That's not an option, Emma. You know too much now. You're either with us or, well, let's just say we have ways of dealing with threats to our operation." I felt trapped, cornered. But a part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, was intrigued. The power they held, the knowledge, it was seductive. What would I have to do? I heard myself asking, hardly believing the words coming out of my mouth. The group seemed to relax slightly. "For now, just return to your life. Act normal. We'll be in touch with your first assignment soon." As I left the basement, my head spinning, I knew my life would never be the same. I had uncovered a conspiracy beyond my wildest imagination, and now I was a part of it. The next few weeks were a blur. I went through the motions of my daily life, hyper-aware of the cameras watching my every move. But now, I was watching too. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before, the carefully placed cameras in public spaces, the way certain people always seemed to be observing others. My first assignment came in a plain envelope slipped under my door. It contained a name, an address, and instructions to plant a camera in a specific location. My hands shook as I read it, the reality of what I'd become crashing down on me. I stood at a crossroads. I could go through with it, become one of them, always watching, never truly living. Or I could fight back, expose them, risk everything. As I sit here now, writing this down, I still haven't decided what to do. But I know one thing for certain. Nothing is as it seems. The world is full of eyes, always watching, always recording. And once you become aware of it, you can never go back to blissful ignorance. So the next time you feel like you're being watched, trust that instinct. Because in this brave new world of constant surveillance, paranoia might just be the most rational response. The crunch of leaves under my boots echoed through the forest, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen over the woods. I'd been a park ranger for 15 years, but something about this patrol felt different. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw it, a crude camp hidden among the trees, littered with empty bullet casings and animal remains. My heart raced as I realized I'd stumbled upon something far more dangerous than the usual lost hiker or campfire gone wrong. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my routine patrol turned into a life-or-death struggle against a group of ruthless poachers. I'd always loved the outdoors. Growing up in a small town nestled against the mountains, I spent more time in the woods than I did in my own home. Becoming a park ranger was a natural choice, a way to protect the wilderness I loved so much. Willowbrook National Park had been my home for the past decade, and I knew every trail, every stream, every rocky outcropping like the back of my hand. That day started like any other. I'd set out at dawn, my backpack loaded with supplies for a long day of patrolling the park's more remote areas. The autumn air was crisp, and the changing leaves painted the forest in brilliant shades of red and gold. It should have been beautiful, peaceful, but from the moment I stepped onto the trail, something felt off. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, the occasional scurry of a small animal, were muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was being paranoid, but 15 years of experience had taught me to trust my instincts. I'd been hiking for about 3 hours when I first noticed the signs. Broken branches that didn't look like natural wear and tear, boot prints that were too fresh, too deep to be from fellow hikers. The park had been closed to the public for the past week due to fire risks. And then, the smell. A sickly sweet odor that turned my stomach, one I recognized all too well. Decaying flesh. Following my nose in the trail of disturbances, I pushed deeper into a part of the forest that was off the main trails. That's when I found the camp. It was well hidden, tucked into a small clearing surrounded by dense underbrush. But to my trained eye, it was clear this was no ordinary campsite. Camouflage tarps were strung between trees, creating makeshift shelters. A fire pit, carefully constructed to minimize smoke, sat cold in the center. But it was the other items scattered around that made my blood run cold. Snares and steel traps, high-powered rifles leaning against trees, and everywhere, the evidence of their grisly work, piles of animal pelts, antlers, and other trophies. I'd heard rumors of poaching rings operating in the area, but I'd never seen evidence this blatant. This wasn't just a couple of locals hunting out of season. This was organized, professional, and incredibly dangerous. I reached for my radio, ready to call for backup, when a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt, but I was too slow. "Well, well," a gruff voice said. "Looks like we've got ourselves a nosy ranger." 3 men emerged from the trees, rifles aimed squarely at my chest. They were rough-looking, with the hardened expressions of men used to operating outside the law. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned at me, but it was a predator's grin, cold and calculating. "Now, what are we going to do with you?" he mused, taking a step closer. I raised my hand slowly, mind racing. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't want to do this. Attacking a federal officer will only make things worse for you. Why don't we talk about this?" The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the clearing. "Talk, sweetheart. I don't think you understand the situation. There's no talking your way out of this." One of the other men spoke up, his voice nervous. "We should just get out of here, boss. Leave her tied up and make a run for it." The leader shook his head. "No, she's seen too much. We can't risk it." My heart sank as I realized what he was implying. These men weren't just poachers, they were killers. And I was their next target. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I dropped to the ground, simultaneously pulling the bear spray from my belt. As I fell, I heard the crack of a rifle, felt the wind of a bullet passing just over my head. I rolled, coming up in a crouch, and unleashed a stream of spray directly into the face of the nearest poacher. He screamed, dropping his rifle and clawing at his eyes. I didn't wait to see the effect on the others. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face as I fled. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. I knew these woods better than they did, but they had the advantage of numbers and firepower. My only hope was to lose them long enough to call for help. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. But I didn't dare stop. Every so often, I'd hear a shout or the crack of a branch, reminding me that my pursuers were still on my trail. As I ran, I tried to formulate a plan. I needed to find a place with cell service to call for backup. The nearest ranger station was miles away, but there was an old fire tower on top of Cascade Ridge that might work. It was a steep climb, but if I could make it, I'd have a chance. I veered off toward the ridge, the terrain becoming steeper and more treacherous. Loose rocks slid under my feet, and more than once I nearly lost my footing, but fear and adrenaline kept me going. About halfway up the ridge, I allowed myself a moment to rest, pressing myself against a large boulder and straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. For a few blissful seconds, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, a voice carried on the wind. "I see her. Up on the ridge." Panic gave me a fresh burst of energy. I scrambled up the rocky slope, no longer caring about stealth, focused solely on reaching the tower. When I finally crested the ridge, the old fire tower loomed before me, a rusted metal skeleton against the sky. I practically flew up the stairs, taking them two at a time, praying that my cell phone would find a signal. At the top, breathless and shaking, I pulled out my phone. 1 bar. It would have to do. I dialed dispatch, my eyes scanning the forest below for any sign of the poachers. "This is Ranger Sarah Mackenzie," I gasped as soon as the call connected. "I need immediate backup at Cascade Ridge Fire Tower. Armed poachers in pursuit. Shots fired. I repeat, shots." A bullet pinged off the metal railing beside me, and I dropped to the floor of the tower, the phone skittering out of my hand. "Come on down, Ranger," the leader's voice floated up. "There's nowhere left to run." He was right. I was trapped. But at least I'd managed to get the call out. Now it was a question of whether help would arrive in time. The next hour was the longest of my life. The poachers, not willing to risk the exposed climb up the tower, settled in to wait me out. They knew as well as I did that I had no way down without exposing myself to their rifles. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable: helicopter rotors. The poachers heard it too. Their shouts of alarm were music to my ears. What followed was a flurry of activity. Park Service helicopters, state police, even a SWAT team converged on the area. The poachers, realizing they were outgunned and outnumbered, surrendered without further violence. As I was helped down from the tower, shaky but alive, I felt a mix of relief, exhaustion, and pride. I'd faced the darkest side of humanity and survived. More than that, I'd helped bring down a major poaching operation, one that had been terrorizing the park for months. In the days and weeks that followed, as I gave statements and testified in court, I often thought about that day in the woods, about how quickly a routine patrol had turned into a fight for survival, about the thin line between civilization and savagery, and how easy it is to cross. I still work as a ranger. The forest is still my home, still the place where I feel most alive. But now, when I walk the trails, I carry with me the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows. I'm more cautious, more alert, and I have a newfound appreciation for the quiet days, the uneventful patrols, because I know now, more than ever, that in the wilderness, everything can change in an instant. And sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones that walk on two legs. The smell hit me first, antiseptic and something else, something sickly sweet that turned my stomach. As I made my rounds through the dimly lit corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, a chill ran down my spine. Something was off tonight. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Little did I know, my overnight shift was about to plunge me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about medicine, ethics, and the thin line between life and death. My name is Dr. Emily Chen, and I've been a night shift nurse at St. Mary's for the past 3 years. I thought I'd seen it all: gruesome injuries, miraculous recoveries, and everything in between. But nothing could have prepared me for what I uncovered that fateful night. It started innocently enough. I was doing my usual rounds, checking on patients, administering medications, and updating charts. The hospital was quiet, as it often is in the early hours of the morning. Most patients were asleep, and the skeleton crew of night staff moved about with the hushed efficiency of those accustomed to working while the rest of the world slumbers. I had just finished checking on Mrs. Gonzalez in room 305 when I noticed something strange. The door to room 307 was closed, which was odd. We usually kept doors open for easy monitoring unless a patient specifically requested privacy. I didn't remember any such request for this room. As I approached, I heard muffled voices from inside. One was low and urgent, the other barely audible. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Something told me I shouldn't interrupt, that I should walk away and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But my duty as a nurse overrode my instincts. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. "Everything okay in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The scene that greeted me was bizarre. Dr. Reeves, one of our most respected surgeons, was standing over the patient's bed. But instead of examining the elderly man who had been admitted for routine observation, he was holding a syringe filled with a strange, iridescent liquid. Dr. Reeves whirled around, his face a mask of shock and anger. "Nurse Chen, what are you doing here?" I struggled to find words, my eyes darting between the doctor and the syringe. I heard voices. I was just checking. "Everything is fine," Dr. Reeves snapped, quickly hiding the syringe behind his back. "Mr. Peterson here was just feeling a bit restless. I'm taking care of it." But Mr. Peterson didn't look restless. In fact, he looked terrified, his eyes wide and pleading. As I watched, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. "Doctor," I said slowly, "what's in that syringe?" Dr. Reeves' expression hardened. "That's none of your concern, Nurse Chen. I suggest you leave now and forget what you've seen, for your own good." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Every instinct told me to run, to pretend this had never happened. But I couldn't abandon Mr. Peterson. Whatever was happening here was wrong. Deeply wrong. "I'm sorry, doctor, but I can't do that," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I need you to put down that syringe and step away from the patient." For a moment, I thought he might comply. Then, faster than I could react, he lunged forward, shoving me aside. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the bed. By the time I regained my balance, Dr. Reeves was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. I turned to Mr. Peterson, my heart racing. "Are you all right? What happened?" But Mr. Peterson couldn't answer. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he began to convulse violently. Alarms blared as his vitals spiked erratically. I sprang into action, calling a code blue and starting CPR. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the crash team arrived. We worked frantically to stabilize Mr. Peterson, but it was no use. At 3:47 a.m., he was pronounced dead. As the team cleared out, leaving me to clean up and prepare the body, my mind was reeling. What had I just witnessed? What was in that syringe? And why would Dr. Reeves, a man with an impeccable reputation, be involved in something so clearly unethical? I knew I should report what I'd seen immediately. But to whom? If a respected surgeon like Dr. Reeves was involved, who else might be implicated? Who could I trust? Over the next few days, I grappled with what to do. I started paying closer attention to the goings-on in the hospital, especially during the night shift. And what I saw disturbed me deeply. There were other instances of doctors and nurses entering rooms they shouldn't, of hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. More alarmingly, I noticed a pattern of patients, mostly elderly or terminal cases, dying unexpectedly during the night. I started digging, carefully at first, then with increasing urgency. I reviewed charts, cross-referenced death certificates, even snuck into the hospital's records room after hours. What I uncovered was staggering. Over the past year, the mortality rate for certain types of patients had skyrocketed at St. Mary's, but instead of raising red flags, these deaths were being quietly swept under the rug. Death certificates were falsified, records altered. But why? What could possibly motivate medical professionals to essentially murder their patients? The answer came to me in a moment of horrified realization. The organ transplant list. St. Mary's had recently been celebrated for its remarkably short wait times for organ transplants. They were saving lives at an unprecedented rate, but at what cost? I felt sick as the pieces fell into place. They were harvesting organs from patients deemed less valuable, the elderly, the terminally ill, to save those they deemed more worthy of life. Playing God in the most horrific way imaginable, I knew I had to act to expose this atrocity, but I also knew that doing so would put my life in danger. These people had already proven they were willing to kill to keep their secret. I spent a week gathering evidence, making copies of records, even managing to sneak a sample of the mysterious substance from the hospital's pharmacy. I put everything on a flash drive and mailed copies to myself and trusted friends, with instructions to take it to the authorities if anything happened to me. Then, on a night much like the one where this all began, I confronted Dr. Reeves. I caught him alone in his office, working late. When I told him what I knew, the color drained from his face. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "We're saving lives. For every life we end, we save 3 or 4 others. Young people, people with families, with futures. It's not your decision to make," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disgust. "You took an oath to do no harm. You're murderers, all of you." I told him I was going to the police and that it was over. I thought I saw resignation in his eyes. I should have known better. As I turned to leave, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. Dr. Reeves had moved with surprising speed, jabbing me with a syringe. As my vision began to blur, I saw genuine regret on his face. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said softly, "but we can't let you stop us. We're doing important work here." I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, not at St. Mary's, but at a facility 2 towns over. The official story was that I'd had an allergic reaction to something at work and had been rushed to the nearest available hospital. But I knew the truth. They had tried to silence me, to discredit me, but they had underestimated me. In the months that followed, as investigations were launched and arrests were made, I often thought about that night, about how quickly the world as I knew it had unraveled, about the thin line between healing and harming, and how easy it is to cross in the name of a greater good. I still work as a nurse, but now I'm more vigilant, more questioning. I've learned that the most dangerous threats can come from those we trust most, those sworn to protect us, and I carry with me always the knowledge that in the sterile halls of our hospitals, in the quiet hours of the night, there are decisions being made, battles being fought, that most of the world will never know about. But I know, and I'll never stop fighting to bring the truth to light. The steady rhythm of my footfalls on the pavement was suddenly broken by the sharp crack of a twig behind me. I faltered mid-stride, my heart leaping into my throat. The park, usually a haven of tranquility in the bustling city, now felt ominous in the gathering twilight. As I glanced over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure ducking behind a tree. In that moment, I realized my evening jog had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. My name is Lily, and I never thought my passion for running would lead me into the most terrifying night of my life. I've always been a runner. There's something freeing about the way your body moves, the steady in and out of your breath, the world blurring at the edges as you focus on the path ahead. It's my escape, my therapy, my time to clear my head after long days at the office. Central Park had been my go-to running spot since I moved to New York City 3 years ago. I knew its winding paths like the back of my hand, from the bustling areas near the entrances to the quieter, more secluded trails deeper inside. I usually stuck to the well-lit, populated areas when running in the evening, but today had been particularly stressful, and I craved the solitude of the park's more remote corners. It was a decision I would come to regret. The sun was just beginning to set when I entered the park, casting long shadows across the grass. The usual crowd of joggers, dog walkers, and tourists was thinning out, heading home for the day. I relished the quiet, the cool air on my skin as I set off down my favorite trail. I was about 2 miles into my run when I first noticed something was off. It was subtle at first, just a feeling of being watched that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I shook it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I rounded a bend in the path, I heard it. Footsteps, not quite in sync with my own, coming from somewhere behind me. I picked up my pace, hoping to put some distance between myself and whoever was back there. The footsteps quickened too. My heart began to race, and not from the exertion of running. I chanced to glance over my shoulder and saw a figure about 50 yards back, matching my pace. That's when I heard the twig snap, and my worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just another runner or a coincidence. I was being followed. Panic surged through me as I realized how vulnerable I was. I was alone in one of the most secluded areas of the park, the sun rapidly sinking below the horizon, with no one around to hear me if I called for help. My mind raced, trying to remember the self-defense classes I'd taken years ago. Keys between the fingers, go for the eyes and groin, scream, fire, instead of the help, because people are more likely to respond. But all of that assumed I could get close enough to my attacker to fight back. I veered off the path, hoping to lose my pursuer in the denser wooded areas. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I could hear him behind me, closing the distance. He was faster, his longer stride eating up the ground between us. In desperation, I changed tactics. Instead of running deeper into the woods, I turned sharply, making for the more populated areas of the park. If I could just reach people, reach light and safety, I might have a chance. But my pursuer seemed to anticipate this move. As I burst out of the tree line onto a wider path, he was there, cutting off my escape route. In the fading light, I could finally see him clearly. He was tall and lean, dressed all in black, with a face mask obscuring his features. But it was his eyes that terrified me the most, cold and predatory, filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "Nowhere to run now, little rabbit," he said, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. I backed away, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon, any avenue of escape. But I was trapped between him and a steep embankment that led down to a creek. As he advanced, I made a split-second decision. I turned and half ran and half slid down the embankment. It was reckless, dangerous, but it was my only chance. I heard him curse behind me as he gave chase. The creek was shallow but fast-moving, the water icy cold as I splashed through it. The shock of it spurred me on, giving me a burst of energy born of pure survival instinct. I scrambled up the opposite bank, mud squelching under my feet, my sodden clothes weighing me down. I ran blindly now, no longer caring about direction, focused solely on putting distance between myself and my pursuer. The park had become a maze of shadows and looming shapes in the growing darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent a jolt of terror through me. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. My lungs were on fire. my legs trembling with exhaustion. But the fear kept me going, the knowledge that to stop was to die. Finally, blessedly, I saw lights ahead. I'd reached the edge of the park where it bordered the city streets. Safety was so close, just a few hundred yards away. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my muscles, the stitch in my side. But then my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to get up. It wasn't broken, but I'd twisted it badly. I could hear him behind me, his breathing heavy but steady. He wasn't exhausted like I was. He'd been toying with me, letting me tire myself out. As his shadow fell over me, I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. But then I heard something that made my eyes snap open. Voices, coming from the street. A group of people, laughing and talking as they entered the park. My pursuer hesitated, looking from me to the approaching group. I seized my chance. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I screamed. It was a primal sound, raw and desperate, filled with all the terror and pain of the last hour. The voices stopped. Then I heard shouts of alarm and the sound of running feet. My attacker cursed, then turned and melted into the shadows of the park. What followed was a blur of police sirens, paramedics, and questions I was too shaken to answer coherently. I was taken to the hospital, treated for exhaustion, dehydration, and my sprained ankle. The police took my statement, promised to increase patrols in the park, but warned me that without a clear description of my attacker, there wasn't much they could do. In the days and weeks that followed, as I dealt with the trauma of that night, I struggled to return to my normal life. The city that I had once loved now felt menacing. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every stranger a possible attacker. I couldn't bring myself to go running, especially not in the park, but slowly, with the help of therapy and a supportive network of friends and family, I began to reclaim my life. I took self-defense classes, not just a few sessions, but intensive training. I bought a personal alarm and pepper spray, and eventually, I started running again, though never alone and never in secluded areas. The man who chased me that night was never caught. Sometimes I still see him in my nightmares, a dark figure always just a few steps behind me. But I refuse to let the fear he instilled in me rule my life. I'm a survivor, not a victim. Now, when I run, I carry with me the knowledge that the world can be a dangerous place, especially for women. But I also carry my strength, my resilience, and the determination to never let fear win. Because sometimes, the most important race we run is the one for our lives, and I intend to keep winning.